evening.
Test, 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 test.
Good evening. Could I get your attention, please? My name is Dr. Sarah Hess Thomas, and I want to welcome all of you here today. I want to thank the Spokane Valley Adventist Seventh-day Adventist Church for opening their home to us and welcoming us. And I also want to thank those that are part of Amen for being willing to come and join us this evening. Just a few things as we get started. I know that there has been questions about what ingredients may be in food. Hopefully you were able to grab a recipe sheet at the front, and then you'll have all the ingredients at your fingertips. Also, we're just going to spend a few minutes. There's going to be appetizers on your table. We're going to pray in just a moment, and then feel free to partake. And in just a few minutes, the main course will be coming out prior to Dr. Youngberg coming to speak with us. So without further ado, can we bow our heads and we'll just bless the food. Dear Heavenly Creator, we thank you for this opportunity to come together and learn more about the amazing creation you made in our brains with this body that you've given us. And thank you for showing us how you've given us food to eat that can help nourish our body and make it even healthier. Dear God, I just pray that you be with the conversation tonight, be with the information that we're going to receive, and help us to glean the information so that we can just make our bodies healthier and we can reflect you better. I pray that you be with us this evening. In your name we pray. Amen. Oh, if you have a gluten-free request, please let your server know there is gluten-free options in the back that will be brought to you. And also, if you have an allergy, please let them know we do have food available for any allergies that we are notified of in advance. Thank you. It sounds like there's some really good food out there. Well, I would like to introduce our speaker this evening. I'd like to introduce Dr. Youngberg. Dr. Youngberg was one of the founders of American College of Lifestyle Medicine. He trained under Dr. Bredesen, and he's been in clinical nutrition and medicine for over 30 years, helping people retain their cognitive abilities and even reverse and prevent Alzheimer's disease. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Youngberg.
Well, it's good to see a packed house at dinner with the doctor. We enjoy doing this at our church too, and we live about an hour north of San Diego. And we'd get a whole bunch of people driving up from San Diego and other people driving down from Riverside. And so I imagine maybe many of you drove a little distance to take advantage of this. So we're glad you're here. Let's just jump right into it. There's a lot of information. Fear not, there's going to be a chance to do Q&A at the end. It's going to start about midnight. No. So hopefully we'll get through this quickly, but there's a lot of information available now that can give you hope. I remember a story of a geriatrician, a friend of mine, who practices at UCSF Medical Center, and he has lots of residents that are coming to the medical center to work with him, and he called me up one day and he says, Wes, I teach my residents the 3 most important words when we're diagnosing Alzheimer's. And I go like, what are those 3 words? And he says, I'm so sorry. And he was telling me that for a reason, because he was really sad that he was stuck in a system that was doing things the old way, because he along with me had been trained with Dr. Bredesen, when he knows that instead of saying I'm so sorry, we should be saying I can help. There is hope. And that's the whole purpose of tonight, is we're going to we're talking about 10 steps to prevent Alzheimer's or reverse cognitive decline. So no matter where you are on this spectrum of cognitive decline, and let me suggest that we're all on this spectrum. Welcome to the club. Okay, I'm on this spectrum too. I'm doing this full program, and I'll guarantee you I'm doing more than 10 steps. This is just the beginning. I'm just going to whet your appetite to show you that there's definitely things that you and I can do to dramatically alter our future risk, because we're all at risk. We've been doing a full weekend series. So this is actually the fourth presentation that I've given on this topic this weekend for a group of physicians and dentists and other health professionals that get together once a year in this area. But I saved the very first introductory presentation to the fourth, because I knew that many of you from the community would be joining us here at Dinner with the Doctor. So for you doctors in the audience, we're finally getting to the beginning. We already did the middle part. Now we're going to do the beginning part, and we're going to look at some opportunities that we have. So let's just jump right into this. If I get this to work. All right, let's try this. Let's try it this way. The screen works, that's the important part.
Let's run it. Just tell me when to move it, and I will advance the slides.
Okay.
Just tell me when.
Yeah, that's even better. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Wow. Okay, let's just a second here. So we might have to use, may have to just go find and go here, here.
Okay.
I think the way I just did is I pushed this.
Okay.
All right, so for you doctors in the audience, you've already seen this a couple times already, but this is a picture of the director of neurology at the Mayo Clinic 10 years ago diagnosing Glenn Campbell with Alzheimer's disease. Many of you might have followed that on the news. Glenn Campbell's wife was an amazing woman who was a real champion and helped him in every way she could and walked him through that whole process. But that was at a time when we didn't have as much information as we do now. There's a lot of information. I just want to encourage those of you that may have just recently gotten some news that, man, you might have mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's or even advanced Alzheimer's. There's hope for everybody. The raffle today is my book, Memory Makeover, How to Prevent Alzheimer's and Reverse Cognitive Decline. It's actually the story. I took really good notes. We were patient for 18 months. I met with the husband of this lady who had advanced Alzheimer's. She'd had Alzheimer's for 15 years already. The last 5 years was advanced Alzheimer's. And when her neurologist called me up on the phone, actually a friend of mine, we were students together at Loma Linda University 40 years ago, okay, and he had attended one of the lectures I gave at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine on this very same topic, and he called me up and says, Wes, as a neurologist, I don't see people like this ever get better, okay, but her husband begged me not to promote putting her in a hospice. I mean, because she said, as a neurologist, he told me, says, you're burning yourself out. You're the primary caregiver. You're the only caregiver. And she's basically in a vegetative state. Says, you got to put her in a home. You can't be doing this by yourself anymore. And he says, I can't do it. I can't do that. He was just so in love with his wife. And he says, I want to do everything possible. So the neurologist, he said, okay, I'm gonna give you a name. So I'm gonna call him up, see if he's willing to take you on. So when he called me, I was like, man. So I want to give people hope, but I don't want to give them false hope. And I'd never worked up to that point. I'd never worked with somebody that had Alzheimer's for 15 years already. She had advanced Alzheimer's for 5 years. So I said, you know what? There's always hope. I'll go ahead and take you on. And so he didn't even have the internet. We couldn't even Zoom because I normally Zoom with patients all over the country. And so he had to actually drive into town and call me from a payphone. And we did that once a month for 18 months, which is a lot more than I normally do. Okay, but you know what? He was so determined. He was so determined, even though he's the only caregiver, and she was essentially in a vegetative state at the time, he started working with her. He started working with her real quick. She had a problem that many of you might recognize called sundowning syndrome. Okay, and if you've ever had a family member or a friend or a colleague that had that, you know it's a devastating syndrome where in the basically late afternoon or early evening, they start having hallucinations. They start thinking, and what her problem was is that she wanted to leave the home. She'd pack all her clothes into a couple suitcases and would say, I'm going to go live with Mom, her mother had been dead for 30 years already. And so every night for 3 years prior to coming into the program, she'd spend 3 or 4 hours, and he would basically be trying to keep her from going out the front door, and it just went on and on and on, and he was just, can you imagine, spending 3 or 4 hours every evening trying to encourage somebody, no, don't leave, stay here, no, well, let's get that suitcase, let's take it back to the bedroom. 3 or 4 hours. And so I'm going like, wow, this is just incredibly challenging. And do you know that within 4 months, that was completely gone? Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to have the same scenario. I'm just telling you that's how this book was written. Every month I type up the notes, and then pretty soon I started seeing, wow, this is a case study of case studies. If somebody that advanced in Alzheimer's can get better, then there is hope for you and I no matter what. Okay, I just want to make sure you understand that, regardless of what your situation is right there. If you're here, that means you're way better off than she was. Okay, so at any rate, instead of spending 3 hours every evening and an hour every morning kind of putting things back into drawers, that completely went away after 4 months. Now, she didn't remember her relatives, her sister. She couldn't really talk on the phone anymore. There's not much that she could do. There's not much function in her life. But do you know that after about 6 months, he says, I wanted to encourage my wife to exercise. That's one of the steps, okay? So I'm jumping into that step. But she didn't want to. What do you do? And so I said, and not his real name, but it was John and Mary. That's their book name, not their real name. And so I said, John, you're just going to have to be as creative as possible, because she's only going to do what you get her to do, what you are able to encourage her to do. So he would say to her, honey, let's go for a walk. She says, I don't want to, she couldn't even express herself other than she'd just say no or shake her head. But then he got a bright idea. He remembered that his wife loved to go shopping. And so he said, honey, you want to go to the mall? She would her eyes would light up. She couldn't talk much, but she knew what that meant. And so she was very eager to get into the car, and they'd drive to the mall, and then they'd go window shopping as they walked around the mall, right? And so that was just one of many examples of things that she did not want to do, but that she became very willing to do because she was enjoying it, right? It's all about how you do it, right? How you encourage people to do different things. Make it positive, don't make it negative. Like, what's wrong with you? You got to exercise. Don't you know you're going to die? You're going to get more and more demented if you don't exercise? That's not going to work, right? That's not going to help. Okay, so we got We got to use honey in that respect to sweeten up the pot a little bit, to encourage people to do the right things. So he found a way. He found a way to encourage her to do all these different things, to eat the right foods. And he was pretty much feeding her, so that made nutrition a lot better, right? So a lot easier in terms of she was only eating what he provided. Sometimes it's the very food that we provide our partner that makes them demented. The reverse of that is the positive part, is that if we are controlling that and we know what to do and we're willing to do that we actually dramatically decrease the next day's and the next week's level of dementia. Because did you know that most dementia is transitory? It depends on what we have done in the last few days. And we'll touch on that in a little bit as well. And so he found ways to encourage her to do things. And then after about 6 months, she had no spatial recognition. She had no time recognition, etc. And then after 6 months, they were driving somewhere, and she said, "Honey, you missed the turn." She knew where she was for the first time in his understanding in probably 5 years. And so, in other words, her brain started working again in ways that were recognizable to her husband. They said, "Wow, she really is improving." And so we were doing regular assessments on her. Her neurologist did a brain MRI on her. And we call it the volumetrics test, where you actually measure the size. Let's go back to Glenn Campbell real quick. Go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. This is where the Mayo Clinic neurologist is pointing his pen at an area of the brain. There's 2 areas right here called the hippocampi, one in each hemisphere of the brain. And as you can see here, that about half of that area, half of this area right here, is completely wiped out. That means that those memory cells, those neurons in the hippocampi, the seat of memory and various emotion and other things, it was basically not just atrophied, but just cleaned out. It's like a hurricane went through there and just wiped it out. Now that happened little by little by little by little over years and decades. We'll explain a little bit more later how that happened. Okay, but the bottom line is that that's the basis that the neurologist at Mayo Clinic had to say, "Glenn, this is very clear indication that your condition is Alzheimer's." And it's not just mild Alzheimer's. This is already fairly advanced. Now, he could still talk. You can watch this video on YouTube. He could still talk. He was a little confused at times, but he was still a good old Glenn Campbell, right? He could still get up and sing pretty good, but he was deteriorating fast. And so the key is, what can we do about regenerating this process? The information that we're beginning to share with you tonight is actually saying that this part of the hippocampus can actually grow. You're not just stopping further deterioration. You're actually putting in new memory cells into that area. You're filling in the gap. How do you do that? We're beginning that discussion now. Next slide. Let me keep talking about this other case. So she, when Mary's neurologist did the same test, go ahead and back it up. That same test, she was at first percentile. In other words, 99% of women her age had the higher level of memory neurons in their hippocampus. So she was all the way down at first percentile. And that's really bad. And yet, I've had people there before who actually improved. And she was one of them. So even if your diagnosis seems really, really challenging, don't give up on that. Ask the question, what can I do now to start changing this around? Next slide. So the hippocampus is about the size of the thumb in the middle of the brain. You saw the picture of it. It's only 1% of the total brain mass. It's the only part of the brain that allows us to remember instantly and long term. It requires daily restoration and production of new free synapses. Now, we've been talking about this a lot with the doctors over the weekend. So this is really critical. The hippocampi, to be healthy, okay, or to start regenerating its potential, has to have daily restoration. This is really critical. So what does that involve? There's all kinds of things. We need the right food that helps restore. We need the right type of improved circulation through exercise. We need to remove the toxins that are causing damage to those neurons. All those factors allow for daily restoration. You know that the brain detoxifies at night, and if you're not sleeping well, and I know a lot of us don't sleep really well, if you're not sleeping well, your brain is not detoxifying anywhere near to its potential, which means that you're going to be blowing up more neurons in your hippocampi, right? So that's really important. So we have to have daily supportive habits. So let's just keep jumping into this. So daily depletion of synapses due to physical, cognitive, or emotional overtaxation leads to hippocampal exhaustion and destruction of the cells. You know that just stress, just a stressful situation. You're having a stressful argument with a spouse or a family member or a coworker or a neighbor. You know that destroys hippocampal memory cells? It blows them up. So when cortisol, the stress hormone, goes too high, it's really toxic to the neurons in the brain, especially the hippocampi. So in other words, we should think twice about letting ourselves get upset about anything and everything. In other words, we got to be more selective about getting upset about things. Now, there are times where we need to get upset. There's times where if we don't get upset, we're going to die, right? But most of the time, that's not true. So I would say 95% of the time that we get upset, we can actually make a strong case that you're actually better off not getting upset. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a neat way to look at it. Well, I wasted my time getting upset, right? And so especially if you know that if you allow yourself to get upset, and I say that on purpose because a lot of us think you made me upset. But the reality is that we allowed ourselves to get upset based on what other people did, right? And so if we decide, I'm not going to let this upset me, we just saved ourselves a couple hundred hippocampi neurons. Wow, okay, so that's the first step in regeneration is don't lose so many every day, right? So anyway, we have the decisions that we make every day have a huge impact on what's happening to that part of the brain that is so critical for taking short-term memories and storing them into long-term memories so that we can enjoy the experiences of our past when we dialogue with our friends and family, right? That's important. So, okay. Oh, did I just change that?
No, maybe.
Oh, look at that. You're the master. You just stay there and it'll be electronically. No, okay, I think we're good. Wow. Okay. Must be some fact checker somewhere. It was fine. So okay, let's let him talk. All right. So the key then in this hippocampal neurogenesis, basically growing new neurons in that portion of the brain, is to promote all natural strategies that promote production of new memory neurons, right? And that's what we're getting into. So it's interesting that researchers at the Karolinska Institute, they have found that we actually produce an average of 700 new hippocampal neurons daily, even as we age. And I'm going to show you here that even if you have cognitive decline as diagnosed by mild cognitive impairment, okay, or early Alzheimer's or early other forms of dementia, you're still producing new neurons. The challenge is to keep them. In other words, don't shoot your new neurons. Let them thrive. Give them miracle grow so that they stay there and they grow. They are able to give you what you need. So what are the factors that determine how many are produced? So it's interesting that in 2019, depression was reported at the highest prevalence in history. You think that's still true? Since 2019, depression has skyrocketed above the highest recorded level in history. Okay, so in fact, so much so that in 2020, depression rates had tripled higher than the highest rates in history. Now, why is this important? Because depression is associated with a 200 to 300% increased risk of developing Alzheimer's. So, in other words, the good news is that if we're doing something that helps the brain, we're actually helping depression and cognition at the same time. All right, so we're getting more for our money, so to speak, right? So depression is actually an expression in the brain of inadequate hippocampal neurogenesis. If you want a new acronym, HN, it's hippocampal neurogenesis, okay? So a bottom line is that if we have depression, that is telling us that there's going to be a problem with breakdown of the neurons in the hippocampi, the memory centers of the brain. So we want to change that. Okay, so this was an interesting TED Talk in 2015, 10 years ago. This has 9 million hits on YouTube. And so Dr. Sandrine Thuret is talking about you can grow new brain cells. 10 years ago she was saying that. Have any of you heard this in the last 10 years? This is on TED. I mean, this is well-documented evidence. You know how long it takes sometimes to get things into the regular medical practice? 30, 40 years after the research is there. So we want to take advantage of this information. Now, bottom line is a year-long study randomized a group to walking 1 hour every day versus no specific walking program. Okay, that's, an hour a day. That takes effort. Okay, it's not hard. It just takes effort. It takes consistency. It takes a willingness to carve out that time and put it into walking. But walking is a powerful way towards improving every aspect of health. And see what happened. After 1 year, neurogenesis activated to the point of their hippocampi growing by 2% in 1 year. You do this for 10 years, your memory center of your brain just grew 20%. That's huge. I learned in school that, once you lose a brain neuron, it's over. You're done. Sorry, you can't replace that. It's absolutely false. It's absolutely false. It's always been false. We just didn't know it back then, right? 40 years ago. And so the reality is that the brain can remold itself. In fact, new information tells us that the brain is completely a new brain after 20 years. Every cell in your brain is now new after 20 years. We just want to make sure that whatever we put into the brain is a good kind of new, rather than a bad kind of new. All right, so we'll show you how to do that. Now, the group that didn't walk, they not only didn't get the benefit of 20% growth of that area of the brain, which means that you have millions and millions more hippocampal neurons in that area. Not only did they not get that benefit, but they regressed by 1.4% in 1 year. In 10 years, that's 14% worse, smaller, which means that you've destroyed millions more cells in the hippocampi during that period. Okay, so obviously we don't want that to happen, right? So that we talked about the hippocampal volumetric So when you get a brain MRI, talk to your doctor about requesting that be measured by a software package. Every imaging center worth its salt should have an imaging software package called NeuroQuant or NeuroReader, where they can instantly take that brain MRI and give you a number, the size of your hippocampi, as well as the sizes of other sections of your brain, which can be very helpful for diagnostics. But most importantly, you want a baseline. You want to see how you compare to other people your age and your gender. Okay? And so that's really important. Having just a radiologist say, well, it looks appear to be like age-related diffuse degeneration, like, what does that mean? So that doesn't help us. What we need to know is what's the number? And that can be easily done with a software package. So really insist that your brain MRI, if you're having any concerns with regards to cognition, is run through that software package. Right? It should be easily done. Now here's an interesting study, basically of mice running on a wheel. Okay, here's mice that weren't running on a wheel. And these black dots are new hippocampal neurons. Okay, look at the ones that were running on the wheel. Okay, they're growing all kinds of new hippocampi. Okay, so if you want to start reversing, and by the way, just join me, right? Because that's what I'm doing. I'm on this full program. Why? My grandfather had Alzheimer's. My uncle has Alzheimer's. Okay, I know I'm at risk. I told the doctors this story. I don't have the time to tell you tonight. It's a great story, though. So you'll hear it some other day. Okay, so I know I'm at risk, and I'm making sure that I'm taking advantage of that. So if now you know that exercise is a critically beneficial strategy, and we'll talk about 3 specific types of exercise in a little bit. So here's a study. If you're like going, this guy's just blowing hot air, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. Where's the data? Where's the studies? Okay, here's the study. I always tell the doctors when I present to them, don't believe me, look it up yourself. That's what I had to do. Okay, I'm not just going to believe other people because they say it. Okay, I want to look at the data and critically think from cause to effect and say, okay, this makes sense now. I understand it. Therefore, I can promote it to my patients or to my friends and family members. So you also check it out. So here's a key study in 2019, basically saying here, and the title says it all. Human hippocampal neurogenesis, new growth of neurons, persists in aged adults and in Alzheimer's disease patients. So even if you have Alzheimer's, your brain is still making new cells in the memory. Your task is figure out how do you keep them? How do you keep them healthy? So here's basically the research term. They did 18 samples of individuals that had either cognitively normal or had mild cognitive impairment or who had actually Alzheimer's type dementia. And they took sections of the hippocampus. Obviously, this was after they died, right? And then stained them for markers of stem cells called neural progenitor cells, NPCs, and new neurons. And then they did MRI estimations of growth of new neurons. And what they found is that on average, there was about 2,400 new neural progenitor cells per brain. And this is on autopsy. In other words, you're always making new neurons, no matter what. So it was significantly lower in people who had mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's, but it was still happening. And I'd like to suggest that if you follow all the strategies that the research suggests helps, and these are all natural or simple remedies that anybody can do, that they can, you eventually get to that tipping point where you're now growing more neurons than you're losing. You're now getting better. You're starting to heal that process. That's our goal. So this is a slide from Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's been a neurologist for over 45 years, and he shows this picture as an example of a warehouse with 32 holes in the ceiling. Okay, and so the problem with Alzheimer's research is that they've also always focused on monotherapeutic strategies. We're going to give you this one drug, and we're going to follow you for 10 years to see if it helps. Not even 10 years, maybe a year or two, typically. And there's not one study that's actually shown that there's been long-term benefit. Not one. When you focus on monotherapeutic strategies, that's rarely going to work. Even if that one monotherapeutic remedy is a reasonable remedy, it's just one thing. You got 32 holes. You can't just fix one of the holes and say, like, why is it still wet in here? Why is it still moldy in here? Why is there still a draft going through this building? Because you got 31 holes left. So that's the key in dealing with conditions like this, is that you got to start stepping back and looking at the big picture and saying, how can I determine where all the holes are and do my best to fix as many of them as possible? That's what this is all about. And that can be a journey that takes a year or more, but it's doable. I know it's doable. I work with many patients to accomplish that. So here's a study published in Biomedicines by Dr. Bredesen and colleagues. Sustained cognitive improvement in Alzheimer's disease. Sustained. There was never been a study that showed sustained improvement until he published this. And he called it the precision medicine protocol, where we're focusing on the individual. We're not doing a big statistical study and saying, on average, this worked, so you should try it too. Well, maybe that doesn't apply to you at all based on your genetic or otherwise makeup. So when we're talking about precision medicine, we're talking about doing things that are best based on your medical history, your family history, your specific labs, and not just a couple, but hundreds of labs, and your genetics, and not just one or two genes, but hundreds of genes that tell us what to do and where to fix the problem. So let's look at this. Let me just read this to you, because this is so interesting. So here's the abstract. It says, arguably, the most important parameter in treating cognitive decline associated with Alzheimer's disease is the length of time in which improvement, if achieved at all, is sustained. You'd think that there'd be a lot of studies on that. There aren't any. This is the first time it's being addressed. Okay, that's an interesting revelation. Okay, so, however, Dr. Bredesen says, monotherapies such as donepezil and memantine, which are oftentimes the doctor will say, hey, if you have mild cognitive impairment that's more significant, you have some problems with functionality of daily living, and or you have early Alzheimer's or Alzheimer's in general, we can give you these medicines. But an honest doctor, and usually they're all honest, okay, they will say, just understand that they're not going to help you in the long run. They just may help you with some of your symptoms temporarily, but they do not change the course of the disease. Okay, that's so in other words, these monotherapies are associated with more rapid decline than no treatment in patients over a multi-year follow-up. So in other words, so when they do follow up patients for more than a couple years, those on the medication are actually doing worse than those that didn't take it. Okay, so again, this isn't me. Don't shoot the messenger. This is a study that's published in Biomed. So, furthermore, anti-amyloid antibody treatment, which is at best simply slows decline, is associated with accelerated cerebral atrophy. Anybody on those medications, I wonder if anybody was told, oh, by the way, we want to put you on this medicine, just be aware it's associated with accelerated cerebral atrophy. We're not going to tell you what that means, Right? So resulting in earlier dementia-associated brain volumes. In other words, earlier in time, you're having shrinkage of the brain. Okay? So, than those that were treated, than untreated patients. So in contrast, and this is where now Dr. Bredesen is talking about a really good protocol, which is specific for every individual. Okay, so a precision medicine approach in which the multiple potential drivers of cognitive decline are identified for each patient and then targeted with a personalized protocol. Not one size fits all, but personalized. Okay, and has led to documented improvements in patients with cognitive decline, but historically, long-term follow-up was not available. That means longer than 5 years. Okay, so now in this study, they're reporting that. So here we report sustained cognitive improvements. In some cases, over a decade, in patients treated with the precision medicine protocol, something that has not been reported in patients treated with anticholinesterase, glutamate receptor inhibitory, or anti-amyloid drugs and other therapeutic protocols. In other words, if you're going to do something, okay, if you're going to do something for 10 years, you just saw, if you do something for 10 years and you're walking for, something equivalent an hour a day, it doesn't even have to be an hour a day, that has regenerative potential that far exceeds anything that has been done with medications. Now, I'm not anti-medication. I'm just saying we got to do what works, right? We only have so much time left. I'm 65. I'm not going to wait 20 years for a study to finally show, hey, this medicine actually might help you. Okay, I'm going to do what right now we know is going to help me, right? So let's keep going. So here's another study published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, 2022, Precision Medicine Approach, a Successful Pilot Project. So let's take a look at this. They took 25 patients who had dementia or mild cognitive impairment, and so they had a Montreal Cognitive Assessment course. You ever been asked to draw a clock and draw a square and remember 5 words, and 5 minutes later, what were those words? I don't know. It's like I can't remember any of them, right? Okay, and so basically you get 30 points on that test, and if you score 26 or above, you're, quote, normal. You could score 30 out of 30 and still have subjective cognitive decline, which is where you're testing really, really well. Leave a couple of those over here, would you? No, I'm joking. So basically, if you're scoring 30 out of 30, that's great. But that doesn't mean that you're not experiencing cognitive decline. It just means that you're a good test taker and you're good at fooling people. You're not, I've been there, right? So the thing is that if you know, no matter what your doctors say, like you're testing really good, if you know that you're not exactly the way you used to be 10 years ago or 20 years ago, if you know something is off, you got subjective cognitive decline. Quick story. Since we got to midnight, I'll tell this story. A network executive came to see me years ago from LA. And he was, normally people see me on Zoom, but he was like, I'm going to go see this guy and make sure he's legit. So he drove from LA, about an hour and a half drive, and he and his wife met with me. And I could tell his wife was more concerned than he was. She was really concerned for him. And he said, I've been concerned. I find it interesting sometimes. Like I'm waiting for somebody to tell me why they're with me, why they're here. And I kind of already know because I've read their paperwork. Okay, but I want to hear it from them. And so they kind of, they talk about their cholesterol, they talk about their blood pressure, they talk about this and that and the other. And finally, they get around, their wife is going like, Come on, get to it. Like they finally get around to, oh yeah, my memory is not what it really used to be. I'm kind of concerned about my cognition. So now it's good to be really open about it. And you know what I do? I tell them all my stories about how I know I'm at high risk of cognitive decline. And I just say, I just tell them flat out, says, I'm on this full program because I know I'm at risk. So welcome. We'll work on this together. We're in the same program, man. And so I'm basically trying, there's so much concern about addressing cognitive decline. There's so much social pressure, like, don't tell anybody. Okay, but it's almost, I see the relief in their face when they know they can just talk to somebody and no, I'm not going to judge them about it. We're just doing this together. We're figuring out how to do this, right? And so, so this network executive, he said to me, I did the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test, and he scored like 29 out of 30, which is really good. It's basically as good as doing 30 out of 30. And he said, yeah, but something's not right. In other words, he's like confused. Why did the test say I'm okay when I'm not? And I said, I didn't say the test said you were okay. I'm just saying you did well on that test. That's all. It's one of many tests. And he says, I was talking to a colleague, and I was confiding in one of my colleagues at this network, this national network. I was saying to him, I'm really concerned about my memory. And his colleague, another board member, goes like, what are you talking about? You're the smartest guy in this entire organization. And he looked at me, he's telling me the story. He looked at me and says, yeah, I know I'm the smartest guy here. He says, but there's something wrong. And of course, I didn't say that to him, but I said, no, there's something wrong because I'm not, he said, I used to be able at board meetings, people would argue about what happened years ago at other meetings. And finally, they would look at him, let's call him David, and they would say, okay, David, what really happened? He said, well, we voted to do this and this and this because of these different reasons. He was like a walking encyclopedia. He just remembered everything. He had a near photographic memory. He says, I don't have that anymore. And I said, welcome to the club. I have never had that. Right? And so that kind of helped disarm him some more, right? And so the thing is that, see, cognitive decline, even in early Alzheimer's, has nothing, or even in late Alzheimer's, has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with being able to access that effectively, okay? And it has to do with being able to connect the dots properly. So we're going to talk about that as we keep moving. So individuals in this study, they had a score at least between 19 and 26, which meant that they qualified, they met the criteria for mild cognitive impairment. They weren't normal, they had cognitive decline, but at a mild level. But there's nothing mild about it. Because I just told you that you already have cognitive decline before you even hit that category. So it's actually really more of an advanced problem, but we just call it mild. So it's actually unfortunate that we're calling it mild, because people go like, oh, it's mild. I'll come back next year and see if it changes. No. Get started on a protocol right now so that it's no longer mild next year. You can actually reverse mild cognitive decline. I've seen it happen over and over again. So this is what they did. They were then evaluated for blood markers, blood tests, lots of them, for inflammation, chronic infection. These are the things that cause cognitive decline. So if you haven't been evaluated for these, or if you're ignoring these, and usually you haven't been evaluated, because these aren't typical tests that are going to be on your yearly physical. Okay, for dysbiosis, what's going on in your gut, Insulin resistance, which is basically a fancy term for you got blood sugar imbalances, your body's overproducing insulin, trying to control your blood sugars, but even that's not good enough. So you're actually having damage to your pancreas, and you're having high blood sugars and then low blood sugars throughout the day, all in the same day. That's really bad for the brain. In fact, it's the number one most common reason people move into Alzheimer's is because of what's been referred to as type 3 diabetes, or basically insulin resistance of the brain. Okay, so, yeah, by the way, you can equally say type 2 diabetes or prediabetes is Alzheimer's of the pancreas. Even before you get diagnosed with prediabetes, your pancreas has undergone changes in the cells of the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas that's very similar to what happens in the destruction of the hippocampi in the brain. Very similar process. That's why you can call the loss of insulin-producing cells in the pancreas a form of Alzheimer's of the pancreas. It's the same kind of pathology going on there, and you can change that dramatically. By the way, before you even get diagnosed with prediabetes, you've already lost over half of the function of your pancreas ability to produce insulin. Before you get diagnosed with prediabetes. So don't take prediabetes lightly. Make sure that you aggressively seek to reverse prediabetes. That's critical. All right, so what they found as the results is that all outcome measures revealed improvements. Everything got better. Sounds good, huh? And even the brain MRI improved. In other words, what does that mean? That means that over a period of less than a year, they could demonstrate improvements or growth of extra hippocampal neurons. So now the hippocampus is larger than it was a year before. Who says you can't get better with old age? Okay, so here's the bottom line of this study that Dr. Bredesen is citing, is that of all the participants in this study, 12% got worse. They declined for various reasons. 4% had no change. And by the way, no change is success, because what normally happens is that people with cognitive decline keep declining steadily every 3 to 4 months. They just get worse, they get worse, and then it tends to snowball. So if you have a study over a year that's no change, that in itself is better than any drug trial. Because the drug trials basically just show a slowdown in progression of the disease. In other words, you're still getting worse, you're just not getting as worse as you would have otherwise been. Okay, which is still better than nothing, right? But look at this number here, 84% improved. So I always tell my patients this, there's 3 goals. And when they first come in to see me or I'm seeing them on Zoom, I say, listen, I want to make sure that we're clear on what the expectations are. There's 3 goals that I have for my patients. Number 1, the most important goal is we want to slow this down. They go like, whoa, I didn't drive all the way here or, make this appointment just to slow it down. I go, I know, but if you can't slow it down, you're not going to get better. So that's the first step. If your car's, out of control, the first step is you got to slow it down. You can't just stop. That would cause a catastrophic event, right? You got to slow it down. So our first and most important goal is to slow it down. We can do that 100% of the time. Okay? Number 2 goal is to stop the progression. And what's really exciting is that in my experience, we've been able to, and other doctors like me, we've been able to do that about 90% of the time. And what Dr. Bredesen is showing in this study, when you're making sure that paying attention to a lot of different indicators, figuring out where all the problems lie and starting to address every one, filling in those 32 holes in the ceiling, you get 84% get better in 1 year. That should give all of us hope. It gives me hope. Okay, so, all right, so here are the 10 steps that we got to run through now really quick if we're going to finish by midnight. Sorry. So here are the 10 steps. Let's just go through the 10 steps right now, just summary form, and then we'll get into more details about it as we go on. So number one, understanding the cause and effect by testing broadly for risk factors and then optimizing, especially for blood sugar and insulin disorders. A lot of tests to do. You know, a lot of people say, well, I just don't want to do a lot of tests. So you don't want to know what's wrong? You know, because you don't want to know what's causing your problem? We're going to be much more likely to be successful if we know what is off. And we have a lot of data now in medicine, all kinds of risk factors, and we're not just trying to normalize risk factors, we're trying to optimize them. And the more we do that, the greater the potential is that little by little we get to that tipping point where now you're definitely doing better. Every day I have people come up to me and I say, I'm really doing better, thank you. Okay, and sometimes, and I want people to be honest, you know, I don't want them just to make me feel good, right? I want to know, if this is not working, tell me, right? Well, my job is to help you figure this out. So be honest with me. If it's not working, then there's something missing. We got to figure out what that is, right? So number two, take advantage of readily available educational resources. Well, I'm kind of preaching to the choir, aren't I? Okay, so you're here, you're taking advantage of this, and we'll go over more of that. Personalized medicine versus via genetic testing. In other words, take advantage of genetic testing. You know, a lot of patients, myself included, it's like, I don't want to do genetic testing. I heard 23andMe got hacked last year. Yeah, they did. Guess what? Nothing is private. It's not, right? So just get used to the fact that now with AI and supercomputers and quantum computers, there is nothing that's private. So either you're going to know or not. And maybe everybody else at some point has the option to know. You know, other people don't care that much. Okay, right? Okay, so, but maybe you should care. And if you want to know, you can get that information regardless of whether that information gets out somewhere else. I don't really care anymore if that information gets out because I want to know what I can do. And I'm going to show you why that was so important for me and how it could potentially be important for you too. Optimize your vitamin D. Don't believe the propaganda that's coming out even from august medical establishments about vitamin D being bad. It's just not true. Okay, and I wish I could spend 2 hours talking about this because that's my pet peeve. Okay, because vitamin D is so critical that we all take advantage of it. And there's been a war against vitamin D for 25 years. Fortunately, people that are aware of the benefits of vitamin D appear to be winning that war, but not without cost. Okay, so don't fall into the trap of thinking that vitamin D is actually bad for you, because it's not. It's not. It's critically important. Just like everything else, it should be done at the right levels, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so number 5, do 3 types of exercise. We'll talk about that. Test and optimize omega-3 fatty acids, DHA, EPA. I have yet to find a patient that tests really well with DHA, EPA in terms of optimal levels. And your risk of developing dementia after age 65 in a big study out of Framingham, the biggest epidemiologic study ever done and continuing on since 1948, shows that people who have a DHA, it's a special type of omega-3 fat that's typically found in fish, but it's also in fish oil supplements or microalgae vegan supplements, that if your levels are less than 3.8% in your blood, you have a doubling of the risk of Alzheimer's within 7 years compared to those who have a level around 6%. And guess what? I've yet to find anybody above 6%. And I've been testing people for many years. Okay, so those people in Framingham, Massachusetts, they must eat a lot of fish. Okay, and of course they get some protection because of that. Okay, but there's other ways to do it too. The key is, do you have enough omega-3 in your blood? Chances are you don't. And when you test, you prove to yourself the reality of the question. I don't want people to believe me about this. Test yourself, believe the data that came out of your own blood. Okay, that should be convincing to you. It's convincing to me, and that's why I supplement with omega-3 fatty acids every day. And everybody, if you're concerned about this topic, which I suspect you are, right, because you're like me, you're here, then you should take advantage of that. Okay, optimize sleep, quality, timing, duration, optimize diet. If you're here for dinner at the doctor, you kind of probably know a lot more about diet than a lot of people do. It's critical. It's critical that we do that right, but we got to do the other things too. Be wise about alcohol. We'll talk about that. Optimize your immune system. And those are the first 10 steps of many steps. So let's just jump into this. Okay, so number one, here's the bottom line. I've been ordering a glucose tolerance test, which means that you go into the lab and you get a blood draw, however many labs you're going to do. Okay, and then you're given a 75-gram glucola drink that the lab provides you. It's like a medium Sprite. It tastes like a slightly extra sweet Sprite. It's carbonated, and you drink that down. That's the standardized drink nationwide to see how does your body handle carbohydrates in liquid form. Okay, you can actually do a food tolerance test if you prefer, but why not just do the test that really compares you with everybody else? Okay, so that's why I encourage you, because bottom line is that most people who do that test, we discover things about their health that they had no idea, because every physical they've had, they had perfect fasting blood sugar, and if their doctor was innovative enough to check a fasting insulin level, which most don't, but many doctors are now paying attention to that, you could have perfect levels at fasting and be a metabolic mess the rest of the day after meals. So that's why I strongly recommend what is considered by some to be an alt-moded, kind of disproven 4-hour glucose tolerance test. You know, when I was 17 years old, my mother said, "There's something wrong with you, Wes." She said that a lot. Yeah, I mean, you're joking. And of course there was. There's a lot wrong with all of us, right? And so if we admit it, we can get better. And so she had me do a 4-hour test. And I wish I had the results because I was 17. And she just was sure I had reactive hypoglycemia, which at the time was considered to be kind of a quack diagnosis. And in fact, in many respects, still is considered that, even though I can show you dozens of studies that low blood sugars is one of the worst things for your brain. And at least a third of my patients have what we call reactive hypoglycemia. How do you know? This is the best test for that. That's why I do the 3rd and the 4th hour. We only need the first 2 hours to evaluate insulin resistance, because we measure insulin at fasting, but also 1 hour after that sugar drink, along with the glucose, and then again at 2 hours. And almost all my patients have a huge rise of insulin. Sometimes the blood sugars only go up a little bit, but the insulin goes up a lot. That's bad. That's really bad for the brain. It's bad for cancer risk. It's bad for cardiovascular risk. In fact, Dr. David Eddy, one of the best researchers in this field, did a lot of work for the algorithms that Kaiser uses. He established that insulin resistance is the #1 risk factor for heart disease. Way, way more important than cholesterol ever was. Like at least 4 times, 5 times more important than cholesterol. And from a statistical standpoint. He was the first, Dr. David Eddy, he's a physician and a mathematician. Interesting mix. And so he was the first that was using AI some 20 years ago. They did a computer-based simulation of changing just one risk factor at a time on a computer over a 60-year period and see which risk factor improvement was the most important. And what they found is that by far the most important one was insulin resistance, which can be most easily evaluated by doing a glucose tolerance test. By the way, maybe the reality is that most doctors don't want to order this test. Why? Because they weren't trained to do it. Most doctors don't know anything about this test, and if they do, they think it was an old-fashioned test that is no longer that important. It is extremely important. I've been ordering this test since I started in the late 80s on almost every patient, and it works so wonderfully. Bottom line is that you're checking at 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and 4 hours. So it's a hassle. I tell my patients, this is a hassle. You're going to have to be around the lab all morning. But it's going to be worth it because the number one driver of dementia is insulin resistance. And if we just do fasting tests on you, chances are we're going to miss over 70% of the risk associated with that. Okay, that's why it's worth the hassle. Okay, so anyways, do that kind of test. That's very, very, very important. There is a handout. Oh, here it is. There's a handout that you can go to my website, dryoungberg.com, and download this 11-page handout. It's called Interpreting the 2-Hour Glucose Tolerance Test. I called it 2 hours in this case because in Dubai, where I did a workshop a few months ago, they just couldn't get a 4-hour test, so I had to compromise, right? So we just did a 2-hour. At least we could figure out insulin resistance. But right now you can go, if you can't get your doctor to order this, which I totally get, because, if I was a doctor I didn't know about this test, I wouldn't order it either, right? So you only order tests that you know how to interpret. That's kind of the general rule in medicine, right? And so you can order this test yourself on ultalabtests.com. Ulta, U-L-T-A, labtests, plural.com. Okay, and you can order any lab test you want on your own through that test. You can go to Quest and have it drawn, and then you get the report. Now, obviously, it'd be helpful to have somebody to interpret that for you, right? So that's the next challenge, right? But I'm just saying, do not make the excuse, my doctor won't order this test, like vitamin D. That test is likely out the window for insurance payment. Because 6 months ago, the Endocrine Society says nobody needs to measure their vitamin D anymore. And so the consequence of those guidelines is that insurance companies are going to use that as an excuse to not pay. And if your doctor orders a vitamin D test and insurance company says, we're not going to pay for that, guess what bill you're stuck with? About $350. So why not just buy it yourself, pay for it yourself for about $40, $50? All right? Okay, so that's just the way it is. In other words, my point is, don't use the excuse my doctor won't order it. You order it. It's your health, right? You're the one responsible for your health. That's my point. Okay, so you can get this whole 11-page document that walks you through the whole strategy of how to do this. And of course, this is going to be the highlight of tomorrow morning if you're a doctor. All right, so what I first started learning about this, 1985. I'm in my training at Lomberland University, and the spring seminar comes up, and Dr. James Anderson, the chief endocrinologist at University of Kentucky in Lexington, he's speaking at Randall Visitor Center in Lomberland University, and I'm sitting there listening to him. He's talking about studies that he had done and published in the 70s reversing diabetes. Even brittle diabetics, he was reversing their diabetes 90% of the time. This is a book I wrote about 10 years ago called Goodbye Diabetes. It's a comprehensive lifestyle medicine approach, and I'm putting it here because if you know how to reverse diabetes, you know essentially the framework for reversing cognitive decline. Okay, it's the foundation of it. This is a program that a lot of churches run called Diabetes Undone. Has this church ever done? Yeah. So how many of you have ever run a Diabetes Undone program? The doctors in the room. So, anyways, about I don't know 5 years ago. Yeah, five years ago or so, I worked with Life and Health Network, and they spent over $300,000 putting together a program called Diabetes Undone. I just happened to be the talking head, okay, and working with Brenda Davis here, who's one of the world's leading dietitians out of Canada. And so 40 videos, workbook, cookbook, all kinds, and that people can do that individually or they can do it in a group. It's better if you can do it in a group. So take advantage of that one of those resources. Okay, I got interested in this field on Alzheimer's about just over 11 years ago, because I read this study called Reversal of Cognitive Decline, a novel therapeutic program that was published in the journal Aging in September of 2014. And this is Dr. Del Bredesen presenting 10 case studies of people who had either mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's, and all of them reversed it. In fact, I got to, some years later, Dr. Bredesen referred to me one of these patients who was actually an executive who needed some additional work in the area of metabolic management. And so I got to meet one of these 10 patients. And so he was one of the patients that, he was an executive, very wealthy, multimillionaire, and he went to his locker room, at the elite gym he was at. He couldn't remember his lock, his combination lock. And he went there every day. So I said, well, that's weird. Okay, and so then other things started happening. He started realizing there's something wrong here. And so he worked with doctors that helped him figure it out. The key's got to be personalized. So basically, this Dr. Del Bredesen, who was with the UCLA Department of Neurology, so he published this study, and that got me thinking. Says, wow, I read that paper, and I read it very, very critically, and I noticed that in that review, Dr. Bredesen pointed out that one of the most common drivers of dementia was insulin resistance. That's why that first step is so critical. Okay, and I was an expert at insulin resistance. I'd written a book on it, so I go like, wow, maybe I can help people with dementia, and it was true. Okay, so then comes in Dr. Suzanne de Lamont, a neuropathologist at Brown University. She has published more studies than I could possibly read in the next few years. She's amazing. And so in 2008, actually it was in 1994, that she started publishing studies calling this new neurologic pathology type 3 diabetes of the brain. Okay, so she was basically pointing out that Alzheimer's disease is type 3 diabetes, and she's reviewing the evidence. And, she was one of the world's leading neuropathologists, and just most people would look and go like, what? And they just either ignore it or they'd argue with it. That can't be true. Because Alzheimer's is due to amyloid pathology. And it is related to that. But almost all the research up until recently has been focused on removing amyloid plaque from the brain. Guess what? Amyloid is the most potent antimicrobial protein in the brain. It's the most powerful antibiotic, natural antibiotic produced by the glial structural cells of the brain. Do you want to remove the most potent antimicrobial therapy in your brain? It's kind of like saying, oh no, the arm is full of pus. Let's destroy the immune system. I'm not being facetious here. Okay, because why is there pus? Well, the immune system, the white blood cells are coming in there, and that's what pus is. There's a bunch of dead immune cells, right? So you don't destroy the immune system. Okay, those are your dead soldiers that gave their lives to keep you from dying. So you don't destroy the soldiers that are still alive, right? You encourage them, you support them. And so that's why over 10 years ago there was a interesting vaccine study that targeted beta amyloid plaques in the brain, and it was working. It was amazing. It was working. It was getting rid of beta amyloid in the brain. So why didn't you ever hear about this? Because it was putting people at risk of death. It was causing encephalitis. It was dramatically increasing the risk of more damage to the brain, because if you're getting rid of the very thing that's fighting the infection in the brain, you're now increasing inflammation in the brain, which guess what? Is going to stimulate more beta amyloid production. So the answer is not getting rid of beta amyloid, but addressing the cause of the problem and then encouraging the brain. So beta amyloid is good to a point, but then you got to remove. So an immune system is good, but if the pus is building up, you got to let that drain out. You got to get rid of the old dead immune cells, but without damaging the new immune cells that are trying to do their work, right? So that's why you don't just get rid of beta amyloid. You address the cause of the problem. And there's many ways to do that. So here's Dr. Bredesen when I trained with him about 10 years ago. We collaborated in 2018 in putting together a study that combined the practices of 14 doctors. And I was fourth doctor here, but basically just because I brought more. The more patients you brought to the study, the higher your name got in the list. So I worked really hard on that. So it was entitled Reversal of Cognitive Decline, 100 Patients. In other words, just a proof of concept paper showing, hey, here's 100 patients, not just 10 patients from 2014, but now, 4 years later, here's 100 patients. In other words, there's something going on here. Of course, you saw at the beginning the randomized double-blinded study that showed 84% had reversal. So anyway, so that and then there was this there's this study that our paper I put together in the journal the Journal of Lifestyle Medicine that we're going to go over those steps now. Okay, so let's quickly go through this. In order to get effective improvements in Alzheimer's, we must first address the underlying causes and focus on combination strategies. A comprehensive, network-based, synergistic approach. It will be necessary to target multiple pathways simultaneously. Don't say, I'm going to try diet for a couple months. Well, I'm not sure this is helping. Okay, and I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to start exercising for a couple months. Well, that's helping a little bit, but not enough. So I'm going to stop that. Now I'm going to try, getting to bed on time. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to have multiple therapeutic strategies at the same time, or this will not work. Trust me. Okay, so in order to affect an improvement in symptoms and the pathophysiology. So the goal is not simply to normalize metabolic parameters, but rather to optimize them. So when we're talking about blood sugar, somebody said, well, your diabetes is in pretty good control. That's not good enough. Okay, we want to do everything possible to reverse that as much as we can. Because even in pre-diabetes, oh, well, you're not diabetic, you're just pre-diabetic. That just means we got to be careful not to become diabetic, right? No, pre-diabetes carries almost as much risk in promoting Alzheimer's and heart disease and cancer as diabetes does. Okay, so you've already crossed the threshold. So we need to address those early on and optimize them as much as possible. We're not going to go over these slides. This is just showing you when you do comprehensive labs, you're doing a lot of labs. And this is both in my book, Memory Makeover, on page 83 and 84, but you can just download that free on my website, dryoungberg.com. In fact, about a fourth of my book you can download free on my website in the lab section. The lab section have a whole list of all these labs, and the whole chapter on labs in my book Memory Makeover is there for you to download free if you wish. Okay, so all kinds of labs. It just goes on and on. Okay, so in other words, a lot of people say, why do I have to do all the labs? Because each lab gets us one step closer to getting the goals. That's just as for an example. If the lab gives you improving each lab gives you a 1% benefit, do you want to only have 10 labs? Would you rather have 100 labs? Do the math, right? Okay, so all kinds of labs there. So just as in other chronic diseases, the goal is to reach a threshold effect such that once enough of the underlying causal network components have been impacted, the pathological process would be halted or even improved, right? Slow down, stop, reverse. Those are our three goals that we're shooting for, okay? But that won't happen unless we take this multiphasic approach that's listed here. So the approach is personalized based on over 100 data points, including lab scans, cognitive tests, and history. The protocol has continued optimization over time. In other words, you don't just do it for 3 months and go like, okay, I'm done. No, you keep doing it because you keep getting the benefit if you keep doing it. Each network risk factor is addressed in the most rational physiologic way and as far upstream as possible. Does that make sense? Okay, that's essentially the protocol. So dementia is essentially a decline in mental ability severe enough to interfere with activities of daily living. But the pathology of dementia can happen 20 years before this even begins. And I spent a whole hour working with the doctors yesterday, and Dr. Emerson, who's here as well, and talking about tests that we can use to dramatically impact this risk. So it's very possible. Okay, so take advantage of the resources. I'm going to just fly through these. If you haven't seen this documentary, check it out, memoriesforlifefilm.com. Memories for Life, a wonderful documentary that kind of walks you through this critically, the pros and cons of looking at different professionals and what they say about what we're talking about. This is something that's on my website. It's a program I used to do at Coronado Island and at the Marriott Resort, where I'd have patients and their families fly in for a week and spend a week with me at the resort. Wasn't very inexpensive. Okay, so we didn't do it really a long time. I loved doing it. It was fun. Okay, but I thought, hey, this would be a lot cheaper if we videotape this and put it online as a membership program. So I don't require this of my patients, but this is 15 hours of presentations that I do for families of people with Alzheimer's and the patients, and with all the handouts, etc. So that's available for individuals, families, or churches to use running programs. This is the book, and this is actually the immune dysfunction. The last point is that you got to improve the immune system. About a year and a half ago, I did a 7-part series on the problem with immune dysfunction, how that affects dementia and diabetes, and basically you can see it on rumble.com. It's free, and just go to rumble.com, type in my name. You'll see this. You see this 7-part series. So if you want more information, okay. So genetic testing. I'm going to go through this real quick. Bottom line is that I benefited greatly from this because when I did the genetic testing with 23andMe and then interpreted through a program called MTHFR support, I found out that I was 800% more likely to have a blood clot. Now, is that important to know, or would that be just too terrible to know? That's something you want to know. Okay, and you know what? I knew enough about genetics. When I discovered this, I didn't say, why me? I actually went, all right, this is one more thing that I know what I can do about now. This is one more thing that I'm no longer going to be a victim of because I didn't know. Now I can be a master of it because I do know, and I know what to do about it. Okay, so I have this factor V Leiden mutation, 800% more likely to have a blood clot. I'm probably a lower risk than the average person now. Why? Because I'm addressing this genetic problem. Okay, and so genetic problem, we used to think, you have a genetic problem? You can't do anything about it, right? Because it's genetic. That's wrong thinking. It's totally misguided thinking. When you have a genetic problem, you can, especially if you know where the gene is, which is inferred if you have a genetic problem. You know where the gene is, and we know biochemically exactly where it fits on the pathways, which means we know how to intervene to address that genetic mutation. At least most genes we do. Okay, so it gives us new hope of what to do rather than not knowing what to do. Here's the ApoE4 gene. If you have one copy, like this individual did, one copy of the mutation for ApoE4 increases the risk of Alzheimer's anywhere from 300 to 500%. One copy. Okay, if you have two copies, that goes up to 1,200% or more, depending on the study. Okay, but it is not fully penetrant, meaning it doesn't cause Alzheimer's. It doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. It means, in fact, almost half of people who have Alzheimer's don't even have this mutation. Okay, it just means you're a higher risk, which means time to get busy, right? That's what it means. Like, we can do something about it. So let's do that. Okay, so bottom line, and let me skip through some of this. Okay, so this is an important concept. I mentioned this earlier, but let me read this for you. This is my perspective on dementia: a temporary cognitive impairment. In other words, it doesn't always happen. There's something that's happened in our lives that has influenced this. What is that? We need to figure it out. So it's temporary, associated with an acute exposure. In other words, a recent exposure to one or more dementogens, things that cause dementia in an acute temporary way. Okay, that's the point here. That collectively crosses a threshold level leading to decreased functionality in judgment, communication, organization, and the normal functions of daily living. The point is that, for instance, we get into the diet. I've had patients who, the spouse reports to me, says, my husband, who has dementia, went to a birthday party of a grandson. You're at a birthday party for your grandson. So it is normal to have some ice cream and cake, right? Okay, but here's the challenge. When you have dementia, when you have that hippocampal atrophy, you don't have a reserve that can just bounce back like you used to all those years. And so we talk about, oh, come on, you mean I can't have ice cream and cake? Well, you decide. Okay, so when says my husband had the ice cream and cake, he went into a brain fog of dementia that lasted a week. Now, that may not happen to you or me when we have more resiliency and when we have more reserve in our hippocampus. But when we already have dementia, we don't have that reserve anymore. So we got to be much more careful about things that we think are okay, right? And I wish it was okay to have ice cream and cake every day. I love ice cream and cake. The problem is it destroys hippocampal neurons because of what happens with insulin and blood sugars. It's not hard to believe that. It's not hard to understand that mechanistically. Okay, but it's hard for us to accept it emotionally because it's so normal for us to do that. But that's why it's so normal to get Alzheimer's. It's normal to get Alzheimer's. Did you hear that? Expect it. It's more likely that you'll get Alzheimer's than you'll get cancer. Half of us are on the way to Alzheimer's unless we change something. At least half of us. Okay, optimize your vitamin D. So here's the bottom line. Okay, we could talk about this all night, and we won't. We'll get out of here. We'll start questions pretty soon. I want to go through these steps real quick. The point is that your vitamin D, you want it to be above 50 nanograms per ml. Okay, and there's a lot of, you can go on AI, you can go on all kinds of websites, and you can find out all about these bad things about taking vitamin D. Don't believe it, okay? I first discovered vitamin D by reading the paper some 30 years ago, 25 years ago now. And it was a study done by a Harvard physician who did the analysis, a meta-analysis of blood levels of vitamin D and cancer risk. And he was reporting that the amount of vitamin D in your blood had more to do on whether you got cancer or not than whether you smoked or not. And I remember reading that and go like, well, we got to do some fact checking here. That doesn't sound right, because I was an expert at helping people stop smoking, and that sounded like blasphemy, right? Like, whoa, that's not, or heresy. That doesn't sound right. Well, I looked into it, and that was solid research. He almost lost his tenure at Harvard for doing that study 25 years ago. So they were canceling people way back then. Okay, and because he had the audacity to suggest that people should spend more time in the sun. Are you kidding me? Everybody knows the sun causes cancer, right? No. So we don't get enough sun. We got to do it wisely, but we got to get a lot more sun than we've been getting. Okay, but bottom line is make sure you get enough vitamin D. And so I go with the American Gerontological Society. I completely reject the advice of the Endocrine Society, which I recognize is very august and respected, but I do not respect their guidelines at all. Why? Because they're wrong, and they're putting public health in danger. Whereas the American Gerontological Society says, no, 4,000 units daily up to 10,000. This is what the average patient needs right here. And if you're concerned about this, I've been taking 10,000 units a day for 20 years now, and that keeps me right at the upper end of normal, 70 to 100, which is higher than is recommended. I realize that, okay, but again, go to the research. Okay, that's what I do. I don't go by what the committees say anymore. In fact, I never did, because committees always provide mediocre advice, almost always. I mean, I listen to what they say, but I respectfully disagree once I realize that they're not following the data. Okay, so that's why, you know what I've done all my life? I follow the Mavericks. The old docs that have seen it all, that have used critical thinking to figure out what works and what doesn't, and they're not caught up by what propaganda comes out, what the drug reps are pushing, with their free lunches, that are just doing the best that they can for their patients. Those are the docs I listen to. Okay, and because they're usually right. They're more often right than the committees that sit at some ivory tower that basically may have been told to come up with these guidelines. I've been on committees before where the guidelines were brought to me to approve, to make it look like that I came up with the guidelines. I've sat on those committees. I know how they work. Oftentimes they're a sham. They're promoting a political agenda. So don't get caught up in that propaganda. So here's the bottom line. Now, Dr. Angus Dalgleish, top oncologist at University of London, been doing cancer research for 40 years. I listen to him because he's smart. He's been working with the top researchers in oncology for 40 years. And he says, we've been trying to figure out why is it that so many people don't respond to chemo or even immunotherapy, which is far more effective than chemo. And then MD Anderson just recently came out and says only 20% of our patients respond to immunotherapy. And that's far better than chemo usually, depending on the cancer. Okay, in other words, 80% of the patients getting immunotherapy don't respond. So Dr. Angus Dalgleish is saying, why is this? We're trying to figure this out. You know what he figured out? He just figured it out in the last 6 months. He says, we finally did the data. He says, I'm kicking myself because the data was in front of me all along, but we hardly ever checked vitamin D levels as oncologists. So I started checking vitamin D levels, and I discovered the people who don't respond are the people who have a vitamin D level lower than 40. If your vitamin D is over 40, your innate immune system is far more able to take advantage of the immunotherapy. So it's not that the immunotherapy is wrong, it's just it's not that effective by itself. Why? Because you have to have a somewhat intact immune system for that to work. And so that's an example of why vitamin D is also really critical for the brain as well. So to make sure you optimize vitamin D, okay, it's definitely associated with Alzheimer's. There's no question low vitamin D is associated with Alzheimer's. Okay, so let's just skip through this. Step 5, strengthen your muscles. But real quick, 3 types of exercise. After meal exercise, number 1. Oh, did we miss that? Okay, it can't happen all the time, right? But if you can commit yourself to at least 10 minutes, at least start out maybe 5 minutes, a light physical activity immediately after finishing your meal. And if you have prediabetes or diabetes, all you got to do is just check your blood sugars and see the impact. If you have diabetes, most diabetics have never checked their blood sugars after meals. They only check before meals. That's a huge mistake. You know why? Because you're never going to change anything that you do if you don't know the impact of what you're doing. And so if you eat a meal, check your blood sugar 1 hour after the beginning of the meal, or even 2 hours after the beginning of the meal. And that's going to show you a lot more. And if you exercise right after that meal, I'm not talking about hard exercise. I'm like, well, whatever you're wearing, suit or whatever, just do a little bit of exercise. Walk for 10 minutes. Okay? I saw you, doctor, walking after lunch today. Okay? I followed in your footsteps. Bottom line is you can lower your blood sugars anywhere from 1 to 3 points for every minute you walk right after the meal. So if you have out-of-control diabetes, you're talking about a blood sugar that's at least 100 points better throughout the day just because you walk for 30 minutes after meals. Okay, so after meal exercise, critical for improving circulation to the brain, for improving digestion, and improving blood sugar stability relative to metabolic issues. Second type of exercise is aerobic exercise, some other time of the day. In other words, get fit. You know, and as I get it, as we get older, we just don't feel like it. You know, at 65, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I don't feel like exercising like I used to. But you know what? Sometimes you have to do things you don't feel like doing. It's part of living. And it's a necessity if we're going to get better. So we got to choose. What are we going to do? So find some time during that day before a meal or a couple hours after the meal where you do some type of get sweaty exercise. And if you do some get sweaty exercise, you will benefit greatly. Okay, so number 3 type of exercise, even if it's just 5 to 7 minutes a day or maybe 20 minutes every other day, strength training. Strength training is not just for jocks. It's more important for you and I. Why? Because did you know that the stronger your muscles are, the healthier your hippocampus is? They've done twin studies with middle-aged women that the twin with the strongest thigh muscle has the best brain and the least likely to get dementia. You know what one of the earliest signs is of dementia? Weak leg muscles. Start working out your legs, okay? And that's good for your brain. So that's very important. So number 6, test and optimize your omega-3s. We talked about that already. It's called the omega check, okay? And everybody's low, but see, nobody believes it until they see it with blood that came out of their own veins. And so when you check your omega-3 levels and you see how low they really are compared to the optimals, okay, so basically this test here in the journal Neurology, dramatic impact, okay, and basically this is the study I mentioned to you. 7-year study, Framingham Health Study, longest study ever done. Still going on into the 4th generation now. Over 1,500 people over 65, okay, and there's basically a 49% lower risk of Alzheimer's if your DHA, the omega-3 DHA, was above 6%. I just tried to get people above 4%, 5%, because almost everybody's at 1 to 2%. And that's bad for the brain. I had one of my one of my cousin's daughters was a MD, PhD student at Loma Linda for 10 years. When you do an MD, PhD program, you're studying a long time. She's an ophthalmologist now, but one of her colleagues, who's also an MD, PhD program, came up and talked to me 10 years ago. He says, hey, I read your book on diabetes, and I was really excited that you're talking about omega-3s because I'm doing research on DHA, and it says that when the brain is being damaged by saturated fats and other things that cause oxidative stress in the brain, if we just give a little bit of the omega-3 DHA, it reverses all that. DHA is a healing balm and a healing elixir that helps heal the brain. It helps the glial cells of the brain produce more brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like a hormone elixir that literally heals synapses and helps grow new neurons. So if you're not getting enough DHA, you're missing out on miracle growth for the brain. And essentially, I guarantee you, if you're not supplementing the DHA, you're low. Unless you're like eating salmon every day, which I wouldn't recommend, okay, because then you're getting all the other stuff in salmon, right? Okay, which I don't recommend. Okay, so, all right, so number 7, optimize sleep, and we're almost done here. Basically, I'm kind of reading your minds right now, and I'm going like, if he only knew how hard I try to sleep. I know. I work with people like you every day. I've heard all the stories. I know it's hard. I'm just saying, don't give up, because if you don't figure out how to fix this, your brain is going to hurt. Your brain's not going to do well if you're not optimizing sleep. In other words, even if you got to do a sleep study, you got to figure out, you get a dental appliance, whatever you need to do, let's figure it out. Don't give up until you optimize that, because if you're not sleeping well, you're in trouble. Your brain's in trouble. And by the way, the number one cause of sleeplessness, of where you wake up and you can't go back to sleep, insulin resistance. So that's why the first step is so important, that you evaluate your blood sugar imbalances. Because what happens when your blood sugars are all over the place, in the middle of the night, if your blood sugar crashes, what happens? Your amygdala goes, blood sugars are crashing, we're going to go into coma and die unless I crank up the adrenal glands, which are like tired out. They don't want to do anything. And so they crank up the adrenal glands to produce more cortisol, and that wakes you up. Cortisol is saving your life, and that wakes you up. So at least it saved your life, right? Okay, but we don't want that to happen every night. Okay, so we want to optimize that issue. So make sure that you're addressing sleep. And bottom line is that even in young, healthy subjects, if you go to bed late, you're destroying hippocampal neurons. That's been proven in young, healthy, college-age people. So don't think, you can handle this because you're young. It doesn't work that way. You start losing brain cells in your 20s, hippocampal brain cells. Okay, there's a lot more there, but number 8, optimize your diet. Well, I'm speaking to the choir here. You know about a plant-strong diet. You got to have a plant-strong diet. You want to cut out refined carbs. You want to eliminate unnecessary carbs. You want to optimize non-starchy, green, and colorful carbohydrates. You want to avoid fast foods and sugars. That's so critical. How do you know what's going on? That's one reason it's good to maybe every once in a while get a continuous glucose monitor. You know, they're available now over the counter, Stello. And you can check your blood sugar at any time of the day or night, and you'll be shocked what happens to your blood sugars after you eat. And if that doesn't motivate you, I don't know what will. So make sure you optimize your diet. Okay, and then step 9, be wise about alcohol. So we're gonna end here. Boy, it's hard to do this in just 2 minutes. You know all the studies? Well, let me start here. A couple years ago, I'm actually flying through Seattle, to Walla Walla University, where I'm going to give a talk. Guess what I'm talking about? Alzheimer's, okay? And so I'm in the bookstore at the airport, and I see this special edition of Time magazine. And I go like, wow, the science of Alzheimer's. Hey, let me see what they have to say. Okay, and I was actually intrigued. So I bought this, what it is, how it touches us, and hope. That's what got me. I'm all about hope, right? So I'm going like, great, I'm going to get it. One of the first things I saw. You know, I learned a long time ago. I have a good friend in the magazine business. And basically, you know, if they're doing an article, they're getting paid for it. Time magazine did this article on here's more good news for drinkers. They got paid for that. I guarantee it. Now, I don't know that as a fact, but I don't need to because I know how that works. That's total propaganda. This is total propaganda. You got to realize that. There's very few things. You know, it used to be 30 years ago, you'd read Reader's Digest, right? Remember that? Those guys that are older than me or my age? Okay? And we'd read Reader's Digest, and at least when they had propaganda on Reader's Digest, it would say, this is an advertorial. They don't do that anymore. Because they want to deceive us. They want to mislead us. That's the bottom line. And so, basically, it went on to talk about how good wine was. Now, you can make an argument for that, right? There's all kinds of, quote, epidemiologic studies that suggest that, hey, what could be better for you than a glass of red wine with all that resveratrol, right? Right? I mean, isn't that good for the heart? All that resveratrol? Okay, and there's the studies that suggest, hey, if you have maybe one, maybe two for men, sorry women, you can't have two, you can only have one, okay, in terms of moderation at least. You know, but men, you can have up to 2 drinks a day, and that'd still be technically moderate. Okay, and if you're a moderate drinker, you can have up to statistically, epidemiologically, up to 50% lower risk of heart disease. And I see all kinds of researchers spouting off that data, and it doesn't mean anything because it's not a clinical study. Okay, and there was a horrible methodological flaw in it because in those studies they combined past alcoholics with the teetotalers. They combined people who couldn't drink because of medical conditions with those that didn't drink at all. And so in the end, when you group all those, you know what? You can pretty much figure out, quote, prove or promote any concept scientifically by just manipulating the method of the study. How do I know that? I took almost every research class at the School of Public Health at Loma Linda University. I know how to manipulate studies. In fact, we had classes where we played a game on like, what's wrong with this study? Dr. Lee, so he would always look at me and say, okay, what's wrong with this study, Wes? and so there's basically, you got to be really careful when you read studies. Because on the face value, oftentimes the data might be correct. The methodology might be correct. Not always, not often, but sometimes it is. Okay, but their conclusions are completely wrong from their own data. Why? Because they had to change the conclusions to get it published. So just be aware of that. Be careful with this whole idea of scientism. Okay, so here's the bottom line. So much for 5 minutes on alcohol. So this is real important. Because a lot of people think that if you drink moderately of like red wine, that's actually good for your brain. I guarantee you that's wrong. Okay, but let's just say it's true, just for argument's sake. Let's say it's true that it's good for your heart, which it's not, by the way, because for the reasons I just told you. Okay, but let's just say it's true. Whenever something is good for something, what's the other question that you need to ask? Yeah, okay, it's good for this, but okay, what's the catch? What's the downside? Okay, and here's the downside that should end the argument once and for all. Any amount of cancer, I just gave it away. Okay, any amount of alcohol promotes cancer, any amount. Okay, now you could argue that the studies need to be done better. Okay, but the top oncologists in the world who've written papers, who've written books on this, will say that even if you have one glass of wine a month, you're increasing your risk for colon cancer or breast cancer. There's no question, if you look at the science carefully and critically, that any amount of moderate drinking on a semi-regular basis actually increases your risk for cancer. That should end the story right there. Okay, I mean, you know, if you want to drink, it's a free world. I'm not going to say don't drink, because you're in charge of your health, not me. Okay, you have every right to drink if you want. Okay, you just need to be aware of the facts. That's all, so that you can make a good decision for yourself. Okay, so ending. By the way, that was the main cause of Glenn Campbell's Alzheimer's. By the way, he was a heavy drinker. There's no argument at all about that, right? If you're a heavy drinker, which, by the way, heavy drinker by definition is more than 2 drinks in any given day for a man and more than 1 drink on any given day for a woman. By definition. Now, I realize in practice, heavy drinking is a lot more than that. I'm not naive about that. Okay, but just to be clear on what the criteria show. But here's a study that should also end all questions about this for relative to dementia or cognitive decline. Number one is that this was a study done in 2017. And it was published in the British Medical Journal, which is one of the very few medical journals, medical journals that went through COVID unscathed without being fraudulent. And I'm serious when I say that. Most medical journals actually publish fraudulent data or retracted studies that were not fraudulent. They did not, to my knowledge. And they actually published studies that raised the alarm on many issues relative to the last 4 years. Okay, but before COVID, in 2017, they published this big study. It's a 30-year study that did MRIs at the beginning and throughout a 30-year period. And here's the bottom line. We're going to end with this. Higher consumption of alcohol over a 30-year follow-up was associated with increased odds of hippocampal atrophy in a dose-dependent fashion. Here's the key. If you had more than 1 to 2 drinks on any given day, there was a 580% increased risk of hippocampal atrophy. Not 20%, not 50%, 580%. Okay, if you were a moderate drinker, this is in England, if you're a moderate drinker at 1 to 2 drinks per day or so, there's still a 340% increased risk of hippocampal atrophy. Now, I'm just the messenger here. I'm just telling you, this is one reason I don't drink. I'm fortunate that I grew up in a household that did not drink. Otherwise, I'd be drinking a lot. I know my personality. I would like it. And I'd be like watching all kinds of basketball games, just boozing it up. I know I would be. And so that's another reason why I completely stay away from it. Because it's not one, it's like, I'm all in, baby. And I don't want to do that. I want to stay away from it. Why? Because I know it would destroy me. It would destroy me, so I don't do it. Okay, so you got to decide for yourself how that fits. So that's really important. And there's more information there. So, all right, well, I've kept you way too long, but I got you out before midnight. Okay, so that's the success of my book. Now, let me just say this. You know, there's so much more that we could talk about. Remember that video series I talked about on Rumble? It's a 7-part series on the immune system. So we didn't get to that 10th step today on how to optimize your immune system. but you're just going to have to watch that on your own time. There's 7 presentations on that on Rumble. Just type in my name, Wes Youngberg, and you'll see all that. And I really believe that we are now in a new era of immune dysfunction. Our immune systems are not functioning the way they used to. In large part because we've all gotten COVID. Even if you don't think you have, you have. Right? Everybody's gotten it. And if that COVID is past the barrier from your lungs into your bloodstream, that is doing things to your body to suppress your immune system. And don't take my word for it, but for right now, I would recommend it because it's serious, right? So watch the video series, and I have all the documentation and the studies to prove that. And so I'm encouraging you, take care of your immune system. How do you do that? All the things we've been talking about, okay, and more, of course. All right, so with that, I'm going to say this. I know it's probably past the bedtime for a lot of you, right? And so I know that some of you are like itching to get home. And so, if I may, I don't know if we can dismiss people or not. I'll let Dr. Sarah take care of that. I'm more than willing to stay by and take group questions, okay? But I want to give some of you a chance to get home if you need to. But if you want to ask me questions, I'm here for as long as you want to ask questions, okay? So Dr. Sarah, you're in charge.
Wow, the power. Well, let's say thank you to Dr. Youngberg for all of this amazing information.
Thank you.
So we will definitely do a few questions, but could I do a couple of housekeeping things first? That
You're in
way
charge.
people want to go, they can. We do have a drawing for some door prizes, but as we're starting to do that, first I just wanted to thank everyone that helped with tonight. They're our table hosts.
I was a taste tester, by the way. I got the very first meal. I loved it. Thank you.
I also want to thank our Pathfinders, one of our youth group here that has come to help serve. A lot of them have gone home already, but they're volunteering and coming and spending your time. So we're going to give our thanks to you. Will you stand up?
All right.
Thank you. And will you pass this thanks on to everyone else in the Pathfinder Club that's helped out? Will you share that thanks with them? Thank you.
But you can keep all the tips for yourself.
Also, on your tables, there are some feedback pages. If you wouldn't mind filling out the exit questionnaire and just sharing, we want to continue to make Dinner with the Doctor better. So please fill that out if you would like. And then for those in the Amen Conference, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and please remember that tonight is daylight savings time. Unfortunately, we spring forward. So just a little friendly
Deals
reminder. Alrighty. So we have 5 door prizes. If somebody wants to come help draw numbers, and I'll bring the gifts up. Alrighty, if we want to open the floor for questions, I will bring around the microphone.
I just want to say thank you, and then you said something about like different things can cause Alzheimer's, and I was just wondering, or dementia, is something like emotional, mental, physical trauma. Can that cause dementia? Like,
Yes, so absolutely. In fact, I grew up in Bering Springs, Michigan. I'd be jogging on the road, and once I'd run into Muhammad Ali. He had a home, Muhammad Ali Farms, right on the St. Joe River of Bering Springs, Michigan, where he moved in 1971. I actually sat in the front row watching him spar, and of course, anybody that takes that many hits, okay, especially if you're prone or susceptible, that can lead to neurodegenerative disease. And so I suspect that was part of what was going on with his pathology. But But yeah, trauma of any kind. One reason I'm concerned about dementia risk and Alzheimer's risk, because I've had multiple concussions. I kind of had a crazy life where I'd always be, getting into accidents on my bicycle, running into people. I mean, I lived on the wild side, and so I had multiple concussions playing basketball, etc. And so I know that's one of my risk factors is concussions. And I remember one time I had such a bad concussion, my brain felt like it was on fire for months. I'd sit there in the cold shower just trying to cool off my brain. That's not good. That's not good. So yes, the bottom line is that there's new blood tests that just came available in the last 6 months that actually can measure trauma to the brain in a blood test. Okay, they called phosphorylated tau protein 217, the NFL, neurofilament light, and the glial fibrillary acidic protein. 3 blood tests that are now available for anybody to take advantage of to figure that out.
One quick announcement before the next question is that if you're interested in buying Dr. Youngberg's book, Memory Makeover, we do have a bunch of copies for sale in the lobby.
Okay,
So.
good.
You've shown a balanced approach, and we know that, like smoking, you said smoking, some things are worse than smoking. Like this is sitting is the new smoking
Yeah.
instead of standing or whatever. So is good exercise, can that counteract drinking?
Oh, okay. It's interesting. The bottom line is that every beneficial behavior works to help counteract other things, but any negative behavior works to counteract beneficial things. So it all kind of, do the math, right? It all counts one way or another. But let me answer your question this way. This isn't a bash on social drinkers, because there's very likely social drinkers that are much healthier than non-drinkers that are otherwise very unhealthy. Okay, so if you got a occasional social drinker, and you got that exercises every day, is conscientious about their sleep, is eating a very nutritious diet, and is paying attention to all these other strategies, in my mind, they're going to be a lot healthier than a teetotaler that is maybe not on the best diet, but they think they are, okay, or they, etc. So I think that maybe answers your question. The key here is recognizing, though, that even as the study from the British Medical Journal said, even a very light amount of drinking makes a big difference with hippocampal atrophy. I'll tell you a quick story. I had a patient who was an engineer, brilliant. Engineers are usually a lot smarter than most doctors. Okay, and because they have to be. Doctors need to be able to memorize a lot of stuff. Okay, but engineers, they have to be really smart, or else they're not going to make it through school at all. Okay, so I know a lot of stories of engineers that fixed themselves because their doctor said there was nothing that could be done. It's like you don't tell an engineer that something can't be fixed, because they can fix anything. You just got to figure it out, right? And so, at any rate, this engineer, he came to me because of cognitive concerns, where he'd always be like, he's thinking of pen, the thing you write with, or he'd come up with all kinds of names for stuff. He was word fishing all the time. The very first visit I had with him, he was word fishing 10 times. I usually don't count, but I just couldn't help it, because I knew what he was talking about. I just had to finish the sentences. I normally don't do that, but so he was word fishing. So I said, so I got him on the program, and he was doing really well. He went down to 1 fishing an hour from 10, so 90% improvement. And then he went on vacation and to the beach house. He went to a beach house. We were enjoying, no stress. And all of a sudden, he started word fishing again. It's like, what is going on? And so he came to my office and said, went on vacation, and I had no stress at all. My wife and I are just hanging out by the beach. We're reading, enjoying ourselves. And I started word fishing again. I couldn't figure out what the problem was. And so I started kind of going through the steps with him. And he goes like, oh, I know what it was. I go, what was it? He says, I started having a couple beers every day. You know, what could be wrong with having a couple beers on vacation? Right? I mean, that's so normal. The point is, you got to understand the impact. Just because it's normal, okay, and normally healthy in society, doesn't mean it's healthy for your hippocampus, right? And so in his case, he figured that out. So
I just have a quick question. There's a lot of, like you go to buy vitamin E, for example, and they say it's dirty vitamin E. Do you have a company that you would recommend to get vitamins from that are more clean?
oh man, okay, that was one. Basically, you want to use really reputable kind of pharmaceutical or clinical grade companies. And there's lots of them. But so the problem is with, you know, a lot of patients say, well, I just go to Costco or Walmart to get my vitamins. Well, that's almost guaranteeing you're not getting the best quality, right? Because those companies, even though the name on the label sounds like a good company, you're getting a lower quality supplement from that company. Why? Because they're giving it for a song and a dance, right? So they have to give really low prices to these big groups. And so number one, I do not recommend getting anything from a supplement standpoint from like Costco or Walmart. I have nothing. I shop from there all the time, but I don't shop my supplements from there. Use a reputable company. And how do you know it's reputable? That's a challenge. Here's another thing that I wouldn't do. Don't buy your supplements on Amazon. Okay, what's that?
Bariatric Advantage for a lot of my vitamins.
Okay, and I'm not familiar with them. They may be very good, but don't buy from online retailers. You can buy online, just buy it from the company itself. Not the company on Amazon. It's different. Even though I've talked to the companies, they say, oh yeah, we have a company name on Amazon, but we can't guarantee that supplement. It's a different organization. Okay, so I personally don't trust any supplement companies on Amazon. You don't know what you're getting. Okay, so even though I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon, I don't buy supplements on Amazon. That by the way, that's one reason that my clinic, we've been making available supplements for many years. At first, I didn't want to challenge my reputation by selling stuff out of my clinic. And then one time a patient said to me, so what you're saying, Dr. Youngberg, is that you're more concerned about your reputation than you are about us getting high quality supplements. And I said, you know what? I laughed. I said, that's a good point. So you got me there. And I said, yeah, I guess you're right. And so what I do is, number one, I guarantee the patient that it's the highest pharmaceutical grade possible. So it's a reputable company that I back up. Okay. Number two, we charge the least amount of money that we're allowed to by contract, and we don't charge for shipping. Sounds like I'm doing a promotional here. I'm just telling you that's what I think every doctor should do. I think every doctor should make available, if they're recommending something, they should make it available, okay, and make it available at the cheapest price they're allowed to sell it at. And that's where people would really get the benefit of high quality, low cost. Yeah, I'm going by the mic. Where's the mic?
Right here.
Keep talking. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So I want to thank you. What a wonderful conference. This is very high quality what you got here tonight. Actually,
I'll pay you later.
No. I was going to answer the question. I'm a psychiatrist.
Oh, okay.
And so there was a question about trauma, psychological trauma, and the way that's mediated is through the cortisol.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what you talked about earlier. So instead of the physical trauma like a TBI, the psychological trauma is thought to be mediated by all the stress, like was talked about earlier. So my question for you is, if you had a loved one who has Alzheimer's, and I personally do, And I feel like my family members have kind of sold her, they've put her in to a facility. I feel like she could be manageable, I'd like for us to rally around her a little more. Who would be like a professional or like an umpire that could help me, like would it be a social worker, or do you know of anyone that does consultation with people? And she has, and bless her heart, she has a very small hippocampus on her MRI, but it's nice to know, well, there's things we could do to help her enjoy life. And so I don't know what profession would do that would help arbitrate, if family members disagree on a placement.
That's a great question. I appreciate you talking about, even somebody has a small hippocampus. I've been able to help people become much more functional with a hippocampus lower than first percentile. I mean, really low, as I mentioned. And then frequently you can have somebody with a hippocampal volumetrics of 15 percentile. In 9 months to 12 months, they're already at 85th percentile. Now, percentile just means that doesn't mean you had 50% growth of your hippocampus. That just means that on average, you're now doing better than 85% of people your age compared to only 15% of people your age. So you can have a pretty dramatic improvement in hippocampal volume in just a short time. And so the test should never be a designation of, well, there's nothing we can do. Okay, to me, it gives us an opportunity to improve. So hopefully I've at least initiated some strategies that are very helpful. And many of the strategies are very simple things. There's simple things like I call many of the supplemental strategies. They're very simple remedies. And that there's actually really good data on them. And it's over the counter. You just got to make sure it's healthy. It's a good quality product. And I've seen dramatic improvements just doing that with individuals like this. I had a judge who was a patient. He and his wife were both my patients, but his adult daughter was kind of in charge of care, and the adult son was kind of, analytically evaluating things, but not involved in the consults over Zoom. And so we had them on a comprehensive program that involved a group of over a dozen different supplements. A lot of people think that's excessive. I get that. I understand that. But it was rational. Everything we did was rational, and the judge was doing better. He was improving his function was dramatically improved. And then the daughter, talking about the discussion between family members and the differences of opinion and the challenges with that. So the daughter finally brought this up with her primary care physician, who basically almost scolded her. This is crazy. There's no good evidence for it. Of course, he didn't know the research. He wasn't an expert in that, but he believed in his own mind that this was completely unnecessary and they should just stop that. And so I very carefully encourage them to just be aware that there's consequences to stopping this. And they decided just to follow the advice of her doctor, right? And I get that. And so 3 weeks later, the son wrote me an email. He says, your concerns were very warranted, because as soon as they stopped just the supplements, he basically decompensated within 2 weeks. And I see this a lot. Okay, so it's natural for us to think, well, supplements aren't really that important. Maybe they help a little bit, but they're certainly not important in the sleep and the exercise and the diet, etc. And I agree with that, but they're actually very powerful. A lot of the problems with hippocampal damage is deficiency syndromes and toxicity syndromes, both of which that can be improved dramatically by the right set of supplements. Like, for instance, 90% of Americans are significantly deficient in phosphatidylcholine. 90%. And studies show if you just give CDP choline at 500 milligrams twice a day, that all by itself is more effective than any of the medications for Alzheimer's. And it can even improve the function of the medications. And so I'm taking CDP choline that much every day. I'm doing a lot of things, right? Because I need to. I need to, if I'm going to be on my A game, maybe I'm on my B game, I don't know. Okay, but if I'm going to be close to my A game, I got to do everything that's rational. Okay, so, but to answer your question more directly, doctor, it's you just have to work with health professionals that understand what's at stake. And I think, talking to people who've had experience seeing things like this work, and I'll be the first to agree with you, doctor, that once somebody gets put into the home, it's really hard to get them to improve. I hate to put it, unless it's a specific home that is addressing these principles, and less than 1% of them do. Most of them charge an extra $700 a month just to dish out the supplements that they're taking. I kid you not. Okay, and so that makes them not want to do that either, because it's, that's an extra $700 a month just to give out the supplements every day. Are you kidding me? Okay, and so once you get into that corporate memory care environment, you get caught up in the red tape that they have to follow too, and your momentum in addressing all these potential things that aren't really yet fully accepted in standard of care, okay, falls apart. And they, they get fed ice cream and cake every day. Yeah, and it's because, oh, come on, they deserve it. They love it. Of course they love it. Who doesn't love it? Problem is, the hippocampus doesn't love it, right? And so you're creating dementia. You're basically dramatically increasing the rate of dementia by the things that you do for the patient in a memory care facility, and you think you're doing them a favor because they don't understand these concepts. So that's a real challenge. So I personally encourage families, if at all possible, to keep the family member, the parent or the sibling, in a home environment where they can receive all the love and attention and appreciation that is so critical for hippocampal growth as well, and just emotional nurturing, because otherwise they're not going to get that. They're not going to get that, and they're more likely to get all the other things that they need. So they need to basically sit down with somebody to explain what we're talking about, okay, and to recognize. I'm not saying it's always wrong to put somebody in a home. There's a place for that, but there are new homes now. What's the name of the place in San Diego that actually takes on Alzheimer's patients for up to a year, and they're doing this entire program, everything. Okay, and the patients just thrive, and they're basically taught how to be more self-sufficient, and they can go back to their homes. Not cheap, though. Not cheap. You know what it costs to have somebody in memory care? I mean, it's like, people talk about the cost for consults and getting an exercise bike or doing this or getting organic foods or whatever, the cost for supplements. That is nothing compared to what it costs to put somebody in memory care. We're talking $10,000 a month. Some people have to mortgage their houses or basically give up the rights to their house so they can get the Medicare benefits for memory care. It's horrible. Okay, so you got to count the cost. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's probably as close as I could come. I'm following the mic. So okay, Dr. Sarah's got the mic. Okay, go ahead.
Just a quick question. You talked about a cortisol spike in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Can you discuss that a little more? What causes that again?
Yeah, so as Doctor over here was saying that, emotional stress of any kind. By the way, I've been talking about this all day with the doctor, so I'm glad that you brought that up. It's cortisol, this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction. It's very critical. OB docs and gynecologists will talk about what's the most important hormone that relates to reproductive hormones. They will say cortisol. Okay, but you know what I say? What hormone creates the cortisol dysfunction in the first place? Usually, insulin. So that's why this first step we talked about tonight of doing in fact, I should have mentioned this, I actually measure cortisol on that test too. We do a fasting 1 and 2 hour insulin with a fasting 1, 2, 3, 4 hour glucose, and then a cortisol at fasting 3 and 4 hours. It's not a perfect test, but it basically gives us multiple views of a metabolic syndrome that helps us pick up the ups and the downs, the roller coaster hormonal dysfunction that really messes with our health and causes this major dysfunction. And so when sugar goes up after a meal, which it does in most Americans, and I would argue probably 80-90% of Americans have a rise in blood sugar that's excessive after a meal. Okay, and so I'd say what you eat matters, and what you do immediately after eating matters tremendously to affect the curve of that blood sugar. So as your blood sugar goes up, what goes up with it? Insulin. Insulin has to go up because it's insulin is in attempting to bring down that high blood sugar. Okay, and it works for a lot of people. They have perfect blood sugars. They just have high insulin. I see that all the time. Okay, but more likely what happens is you get high blood sugars and high insulin. You can have 4 or 5 times more insulin than you should have to with a high blood sugar. What does that mean? That means that you not only have significant insulin resistance, but your pancreas is no longer able to produce enough insulin, even though it's making 5 times more than it should have to. It just has maxed out. It's no longer able to do enough. So you already have pancreatic failure, atrophy, okay, even though you're producing 5 times more insulin than you need. So it's an interesting dynamic. And so the insulin levels go up, and then what happens? 1, 2, or 3 hours later, that blood sugar comes crashing down. And when blood sugars come crashing down, what does the amygdala do? Right? The fight or flight process in the brain, it kicks in, goes like, whoa, we're going to go into coma and die if this doesn't get fixed, and boom. And boom, the amygdala goes, adrenals, I don't care if you're tired. I don't care if you're fatigued. You better start making cortisol. We're going to die. Brain cells are going to die. And cortisol shoots up. And you know what? Ironically, when cortisol shoots up high, hippocampal memory cells blow up. They get destroyed. And it was, what's the name of the researcher at Stanford that actually showed this 30 years ago with chimpanzees in Africa? So when they get stressed, cortisol destroys neurons in the brain. It completely blows them up. Okay, and so that's why, and the thing is, be careful. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying cortisol is bad. I'm saying excess cortisol is bad. More people actually have too little cortisol. Okay, and why? Because it's burned out. Because they've had so much stress and cortisol elevation that the adrenals are going like, I can't do this anymore. So now you have a fatigue of the adrenal gland, called adrenal fatigue, okay, adrenal insufficiency of sorts, okay, and so now you have periods of the day where you don't have enough cortisol, which means your immune system is depressed during that time. You have more inflammation, and then other times where it goes excessive. So you got this roller coaster of too much, too little, too much, too little, too much sugar, too little sugar, too much insulin, too little insulin, and so forth. And that's really bad. So we got to stabilize it. And we stabilize it by taking control of our schedule and making decisions that we don't feel like doing at the moment. I don't feel like exercising right after a meals. But I know when I do, I feel better. And so I do it because I know I'll feel better, but I don't feel like it at the time. So we got to do things that go beyond how we feel at the moment. Great segue there. So did that answer your question? Okay.
You had mentioned.
By the way, if you it's almost 9, and I'm happy to stay longer. I'm not scheduled till after midnight. Okay, so no, I'll be asleep then. But I'll stay as long as you guys want. But if you guys need to get home, don't hesitate to leave. Yeah, I won't. It won't be rude if you do that, because I know it's late. But yeah, we'll keep going otherwise. Go ahead.
You had mentioned that salmon, or too much salmon, might not be good. And I had another couple of questions about that, but can you tell me, what did you mean?
All right. It's like, hey, wait a minute. Say this. So you run a fish market?
No, but I eat a lot of fish.
Okay. So here's the thing. I remember when I was a student over 40 years ago, we had at the School of Public Health at Loma Linda, we had a lecturer, a scientist from the Surfrider Foundation come to our school and give a lecture on the toxicity in our oceans.
Yeah.
And he was saying, like, if you eat fish more than once a month, and this was 40 years ago, okay, you're creating a toxicity in your body. And I go like, whoa, I raise my hand. It's like, wait a minute, in public health, you're saying, we're trying to get people to move away from red meat, maybe to a little white meat, and maybe even better yet, to some fish. And you're saying that eating fish once a month, increases toxicity levels? He's saying, hey, don't shoot the messenger. My issue is not with fish. My issue is with what the fish are exposed to.
Right.
And it's a process that we call biomagnification. Okay, where fish get exposed their whole lives to all kinds, even if all they do is eat plankton. They're getting exposed to all the mercury that's been burned all around. Just the mercury that comes from the coal burning in China alone is inundating our land. A lot of it. Okay? Now, I'm not against industrialization. I'm all for industrialization. I mean, people have to live. Okay? I'm just saying that there's a problem with toxicity that we need to somehow deal with on a personal level. We might not be able to control the national or the international level, right? Okay, but we can control it personally. And the number one way to limit your exposure to mercury and other toxins is to avoid eating things that biomagnify it their entire lives. So when we eat a fish, that's a predatory fish in particular, the fish with the larger mouth, right? The larger the mouth means what? They eat a lot of fish smaller than them.
Right.
Okay, and every time they eat a fish smaller than them, they have consumed the entire amount of toxic fat-soluble substance that fish has consumed its entire life. And so you get this exponential biomagnification up the food chain. That's why eating the bigger fish, the predatory fish in particular, swordfish, etc., just loaded with mercury. They're just loaded with toxins. And so that's why if you're going to eat fish, you want to eat the smaller fish, the fish with smaller mouths. Okay, and
farm raised, I guess.
Pardon me?
And farm raised would be better.
Wild caught would be better, probably. Farm raised, that means they're not really getting the diet of healthy fish.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Any particular ocean to avoid?
Okay, you're stumping me here, right? Like, I don't know the answer. So personally, there's actually studies that just came out. In fact, I just saw a report that the Loma Linda University's Adventist Health Study, one of the biggest studies ever done in the country, they showed that Adventists who eat some fish are healthier than Adventists that don't eat fish at all, in terms of Alzheimer's. We answered some of that earlier by, you got to get DHA EPA. Now here's the good news. You can get microalgae-based EPA DHA and supplement that every day. You're not getting any exposure to fish at all. The issue is not whether you eat fish. The issue is, are you exposed to things that are healthy and healing to the brain? And so that's my challenge, is to make sure people do that. Okay, but there's a lot of things that are worse for you than eating some fish once in a while. Okay,
you-
there's a lot of things, right? And so now I personally, believe it or not, I've never eaten fish in my life. Well, that's not true. I had one bite of salmon once in my life, just to see. Somebody say, hey, you want to have a bite? Like, never done it, but
Right.
it's probably not going to kill me. So I ate it. You know what? I didn't really like it. Okay, so I've had salmon once. One bite. Okay, now.
I'm sick of it.
Yes. so I personally choose not to go there. Okay, partly because I have no interest in it. Okay, but I tell you what, if I was in a situation where all I had option was to eat some relatively healthy smallmouth fish, okay, or a stack of French toast, okay, right, which I've had multiple times, unfortunately. Okay, I would be better off having the fish, I believe.
Do you have an
Okay.
opinion on the carnivore diet?
I'm not a fan of it. Okay, here's the main problem. The one thing that you need to be healthy is a lot of non-starchy vegetables. That's the one thing that's a must. Okay, if you're gonna have a healthy diet, it has to start with lots of non-starchy greens and colorful vegetables, and so that's the basis of a healthy diet. Okay, everything else from there is secondary, and so a lot of these diets are basically, you can't even have a little bit of non-starchy without throwing your carbs out of balance, and that's not healthy. That's not healthy. Now, I will say that some of these diets are based on a notion that has a basis in truth, and that is getting rid of all the unhealthy carbohydrates. Okay, so like the Atkins diet and diets like that, including carnivore, are getting rid of all the unhealthy carbohydrates, but they're also getting rid of all the healthy carbohydrates. Okay, so by the way, I believe that the unhealthy carbohydrates are the worst part of food, volume-wise. Now, I would also believe that refined or processed meats are the worst form of food in terms of typical what's available. Okay, but in other words, we should stay away from all processed foods, whether it's vegan or not. Okay, they're bad for us. Okay, but so the key is lots of healthy, non-starchy vegetables and work from there.
Question here. If a person followed religiously and practiced all the recommendations you have made here, would they be still effective for a person 88 years old?
That's your question? Absolutely, absolutely. So I've seen people at any age improve. There's many parts of that question. Is it still healthy to do and we're just touching the surface here. I'm not suggesting that what we've talked about today is in of itself sufficient. That's just the beginning. There's all kinds of other things that we can do that we haven't even talked about. But the concept of incorporating principles like this are good at any age, okay? And they improve our health at any age. And I would argue that the older we are, okay, and the more likely we are to be frail or malnourished, the more important these principles become. So much so that one of the challenges with those of us as we age is we tend to eat less, and unless we're really meticulous about our nutrition program, we're actually being malnourished every day. We're not getting enough of the healthy foods because we're just not eating that much. It's not that we're eating unhealthily, we're just not getting enough of it. Okay, and so that's why we need to make sure we're actually getting more healthy fats. Yes, you heard it from me. More healthy fats. And we need to make sure we're getting enough healthy protein. By the way, the healthiest protein is vegetable proteins. Okay, not proteins that come from soy that's not organic. Why? Because they're loaded with toxins. They're loaded with pesticides. So you don't do soy products unless they're organic. But like organic tofu, I actually love that. You can make that taste any way you want. If you know how to cook it, organic tofu is really good. And adding vegetable proteins to smoothies. As we get older, we need to do more and more of that. I do that. Okay, I make sure I add vegetable protein to my smoothies every day. Why? Because otherwise I'm really not getting enough protein. And I don't want to have muscle catabolism, okay? Or another way to say is muscle cannibalism. When you don't get enough protein in your diet every day, you are cannibalizing your own muscle. And of course, the weaker the smaller your muscle is, the weaker it becomes, and the more frail we become, and that directly impacts Alzheimer's risk. So make sure you get enough protein. Okay, and I say we're shooting for like 70 grams a day. If you're over 70, go for 70 plus grams of protein a day. That's not easy to do when you're not eating a lot of food. So you need to make sure, you need to be intentional about getting enough protein, but getting enough healthy fats, avocados, olive seeds, etc. And even some extra virgin olive oil on a salad is good. Why? Extra virgin olive oil has oleocanthal in it, which blocks toxins that damage the brain. Okay, so by the way, a lot of olive oil is not actually olive oil. It's just a whole bunch of vegetable oils with a little bit of olive oil. So make sure you get a healthy, high-quality olive oil, an extra virgin olive oil. Don't just get the first cheapest olive oil on the shelf, because it's probably not really olive oil, unfortunately. Yes?
I was curious about your experience working with individuals with multiple sclerosis, and specifically if this sort of approach does anything in relation to lesions that have developed on the brain over years.
You know, years ago I worked with quite a few patients that had multiple sclerosis. And I haven't seen a lot of patients recently with MS. Okay, but you know, a lot of these principles, like we were talking about the omega-3 fatty acids, critical. We've known that for 40, 50 years, that optimizing the omega-3, DHA, EPA is critical for MS. And actually, any autoimmune condition, I always say, if you have an autoimmune condition, chances are there's a problem with low-grade infections or toxicities, or susceptibility to those in some way. And so I deal with a lot of people with autoimmune issues, and that we always have to be looking at what's the antecedent, what's the actually original cause of this condition. And there's Dr. Terry Walls, is a physician, an internist who was diagnosed with progressive MS while she was a resident at the University of Iowa Medical Center. And she was told, just quit medicine, you're going to die in a couple of years. She was literally told, there's nothing we can do. She had the worst kind of MS you can get. And she says, no, I'm not going to give up. So she started, this is over 30 years ago, she started studying it in depth and figuring it out, doing the literature searches, kind of like what we're doing with this whole program. And so a very similar program, she figured out how to basically cure herself of progressive MS, not just regular MS. Okay, so so she has a whole program training physicians and patients who have MS on how to deal with that. And so she's very she's got a newsletter that goes out all the time. I always read her newsletters. It's good. And so there's a lot that can be done. The question is, you got to jump through all the hoops. You got to look at all those things, and you got to deal with toxins and deal with low-grade infections, which are the underlying drivers of any autoimmune process. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I have two quick questions. I'm part of the, I think, 30% of our population that has kind of a chronic sleep problem. And so my doctor originally had me on Ambien for quite a period of time. And then I realized read that it was possibly contributory to dementia
Yeah,
in older
right.
age.
Mm-hmm.
So he then got me off that, and he's put me on. I hope I've written it down. It's an antihistamine, hydrochloride, I think. I'm sorry, what? Hydroxydine. Yeah, I didn't come close. Hydroxydine, and also clonidine. And I find it helpful, but I don't know if that's healthy sleep.
You know, these are challenging issues, right? You know, you need to sleep, and yet many sleep aids. The University of Indiana did a big write-up. You can Google this, University of Indiana and medications that impact risk of dementia. And so they have a whole scoring system where you can look at all the medicines you've taken and how many years you've taken them and how they, kind of an algorithm, how that impact the risk of dementia later on. So there's a lot of medicines that actually increase risk of dementia. As we pointed out, that even the medicines used to treat Alzheimer's actually increase long-term risk of dementia. So it's like what? So it's crazy. So we need to do the best that we can with what's available, right? Because you got to be able to sleep, okay? And so, but at the same time, we need to step back and start to ask the question: what else is contributing? What is actually the underlying multiple causes of this? So that's why we began touching, skimming the surface of things that can influence this, including metabolic syndromes and so forth. And so I find the very first thing I do when somebody says, I struggle with sleep, I do a 4-hour glucose tolerance test. I measure their cortisol. I measure their insulin levels. And we try to optimize that. We fix that metabolically, and we see if that helps. And many times it does. Not always, but many times that's the step that is necessary to make a huge difference. Now they're sleeping better. But just raising the omega-3 fatty acid levels just can actually help the brain and kind of calm things down so you're able to sleep better. So there's all kinds of things that we can do to gradually get you to that point. But it's a process, it's a journey, and it does take some patience. It's a challenge. I don't want to oversimplify this. I recognize that this is a huge problem with a large percentage of the population that are trying hard to address it, and yet they haven't been able to figure it out. And so that's why you need to do, see the experts, the subspecialists, the sleep medicine specialists, to do all the diagnostics to make sure that we're not missing anything from that category, and then looking at these other factors as well.
I appreciate it. The other quick question I have is, in my youth, I had a succession of concussions, and the programs that you are putting us on, will that also be helpful if I've had some residual brain damage from the concussions?
Every risk factor that we have, let's just say concussions or traumatic brain injury of some kind, is going to benefit in some way from all the positive things that we've talked about. One thing that we did not address yet is the potential benefit of hyperbaric oxygen treatment. Yeah. And there's actually, there's different schools of thought of some doctors thinking, well, it can really help, and others saying, well, we're not really sure. We're not sure it's worth the cost. It comes at a price, to do hyperbaric. And typically you're wanting to invest in 20 to 40 dives, we call it, where you're going down for about an hour and a half. So they take you down to a pressure similar to being at 60 feet below sea level, and that extra pressure dramatically increases the oxygenation in your blood, and that's an anti-inflammatory. That's really good for the brain. So there's certain atmospheric pressures that have been found to be really good for the brain in healing post or traumatic brain injury years even after it occurred. Okay, so I'm a big fan of that. it's not easy. It's time intensive and it's costly, but that's something that's available to you along with all these other things. So we're always looking at what else can we do.
Okay, hey, thank you. My wife wanted to ask about a doctor. Well, who is he, Doctor? You're
Oh, Gundry?
Dr. Gundry?
Oh yeah.
She buys supplements for doctors.
Okay.
But you know, if you bought every supplement, you wouldn't have room to
Yeah,
eat
exactly.
food.
You know, Dr. Gundry's a good guy. You know, he's probably the best marketer in the world. Yeah, I actually dislike his commercials a lot just because they're everywhere. You know, I mean, but he's a good guy. He's a functional medicine doc. I mean, he's a cardiologist. He's actually a heart surgeon. So he's not a typical cardiologist, but he's just I don't know what advisors he has, but he knows how to make money. You know, and but he has good products. I mean, he's got good programs. He's a functional medicine doctor. He practices down in just north or just east of me. Okay, and you know, I when people ask me what about his supplements, I think they're good. I don't necessarily recommend them to everybody. I mean, I have a specific thing that I might recommend, but he's got good products and he's got good information. I differ with him on some of his theories of what causes disease. But you know what? I'm sure he differs with me on some things too. So that's fine. But he's a good guy. Yes.
So I had some metal fillings removed from my mouth some time ago. I think it's been about 2 years now. And I noticed an improvement in my ability to remember things, short-term memory especially. But what I wanted to know is, are you familiar with any studies that talk about cognitive decline and any of its connections with dental fillings?
There's actually a lot of information on this. I remember I used to have stacks of studies that I would follow over the years, and so there's a lot of data on this. And Dr. Bredesen makes a big point that he has different factors that promote, or categories that promote dementia or neurodegeneration. And one of them is basically toxicity, and clearly, heavy metals are one major category of neurotoxins. Mercury, lead, aluminum, cadmium, arsenic. They're all really bad for the brain, and so I frequently will measure all of those. When I practiced in Guam for 14 years, almost everybody was high in mercury. And I found all kinds of people that were super high in mercury. In Southern California, where I practice now, or I actually have patients all over the country, I don't see that many horrible problems with mercury. But see, here's the problem. Blood mercury levels are only telling us your current exposure over the last few months. It doesn't tell us what you were exposed to and what is still damaging you. Because that mercury is not in your blood anymore. It's in your brain, it's in your organs, it's in your tissues. Okay, and so we're not going to do a brain biopsy to see how much mercury is in your brain, right? And so I think, I've worked with patients who were who worked in these in super cleanup systems, where entire neighborhoods were just messed up because they'd been built on toxic ground and had to go in and clean it up. And one patient in particular developed horrible Alzheimer's. We worked with him for a long time, but we kind of failed with him because he had been exposed to so many toxins. But he did better for a long time, but he still succumbed in the end after about 4 years, and because he had been exposed to so many toxins professionally and as a cleanup specialist. And so toxins are a bad thing. I mean, that's why they call them toxins, right? And so, but it's not just heavy metal toxins. One of the biggest problems is not heavy metals, it's glyphosates from Roundup, pesticides, And there's genes that can tell us how susceptible you are to those. That's a big problem. I do urine tests on that all the time for almost all my patients. But the number one group of toxins that I'm concerned about right now is mycotoxins. Toxins that come from mold. Okay, more of my patients have problems with mold toxicity than any other type of toxicity. Okay, and so, we don't think too much about it. Like a little mold in our house, we just, just wipe it with some Clorox and it's okay. But mold is well known to cause psychiatric problems and neurologic problems. I had a patient one time, she had paranoid schizophrenia. She's 16 years old, was an illegal immigrant. This is years ago. And her mom brought her in to see me. She lived in Riverside, and so I had been doing a lot of research on mold, showing how it's related to paranoid schizophrenia, exposure to mold. And so I started asking the mom about this. She says, "Oh, I get up on the kitchen table almost every day to wipe the mold off the ceiling. It just kind of seeps through the ceiling." And I go, "You got to talk to your landlord." And she says, "Not going to happen. She's an illegal immigrant." So one complaint to the landlord, she's gone. Right? So she just had to, she couldn't help it. And so her daughter, I believe to this day that her daughter, a big part, maybe not all, a big part of her paranoid schizophrenia was actually related to her constant mold exposure that she was susceptible to. We can do blood tests, HLA, human leukocyte antigen blood tests. These are proteomic tests. There's measuring the proteins, the glycoproteins that stick out the outer membrane of the white blood cell. We can measure those proteins, and certain patterns of those proteins make you super susceptible to biologic toxins, the top concern of which is mold toxins. So these are tests I do with patients all the time, and when you're super susceptible, that means you get exposed to mold, your body just holds on to it for decades. And so I did this test on myself just for the fun of it. I did this mycotoxin urine test, and I was higher than most of my patients. Go like, what is going on? Why am I so high in mold toxins in my body? And so I immediately checked my home for mold exposure, which is called an ERMI test, Environmental Relative Moldiness Index. You can go to mycometrics.com and order a test called the ERMI test, mycometrics.com. And I checked my home, and luckily I came out clean. There was no mold contamination in my home. But any little leak anywhere in your house, you got a mold problem. And how many people have, a broken window or a skylight or a leaky faucet in the bathroom or the kitchen, and you got floorboard that is that all warped or something? You got a mold problem. Okay, and if you have, all that was clean for me. So I said, why do I have so much mold in my body? And then I did the HLA-DRDQ blood test. It's a haplotype proteome test. I was super mold susceptible. And then I remembered I just got back from spending 14 years on Guam, where I was exposed to mold every day in my house. And at the time, I thought, it's not going to affect me. I'm Mr. Health. I'm Mr. Fitness. I'm doing all these other things. It's not going to affect me. Every day that mold was built, that mold toxin, the mycotoxins, was building up in my body, creating all kinds of havoc, and I had no idea. And I'm now on a daily, nightly detox program because of that. For me, it's the rest of my life. Because why? Because I'm genetically susceptible to mold. Okay, and epigenetically susceptible as well. And so I have to remove that little by little, and otherwise it's not going to get out of your body, and you're going to be inflamed forever. So that's my big concern. By the way, all kinds of Alzheimer's patients do not get better until they address the mold problem. If you watch the documentary Memories for Life, you'll see that a whole bunch of the people interviewed discovered they had a mold problem that was really subtle. And once they started treating it, they got better. Okay.
We're going to do 2 more questions, and then if Dr. Youngberg wants to answer questions individually while we clean up, he's welcome to.
So you've mentioned about different oils in the diet.
Yes.
And there's a lot of conflicting information out there as to which kind, some, none,
When
all.
it comes to diet, there's always conflicting information.
Yes, always.
Guaranteed.
So I just wanted to hear you speak to that and maybe try to simplify a little bit of what is beneficial and what's harmful.
So, you know, and it's basically your reference point. So I have many colleagues that we have, you know, all my colleagues that are into nutritional medicine, we all have some differences. In other words, if you're trying to get consensus, good luck. Because I don't think there is consensus on the issue of diet. But in terms of the nitty-gritty, you know, but if you're looking at the big principles, there's a lot of consensus. And I remember I called Dr. Dean Ornish years ago. This is maybe 6 years ago, and because I had a multimillionaire philanthropist that had helped reverse his diabetes, and he was so appreciative to me. He says, "Wes, I'll do whatever you want." You know, so that was a test. That was a test. I'm going like, you know, and so I just thanked him. I said, no. It's been good helping you. And he reversed his diabetes at age 89. He had blood sugar, postprandial blood sugars over 300 all the time. Okay, and his A1C after a year was 5.1. He reversed his diabetes in 5 weeks. After 9 months, his A1C was down to 5.2, 5.1. Stayed that way for 10 years. He died at 101. I was at his memorial service. A couple of months before he died, I went to visit him in Laguna Beach, and he said, "Wes, I love you, man." He said, "You saved my life." I go, "No, Tom, you did it. I just showed you the way." He said, "Well, I just appreciate you." He's just a wonderful man. And so he was willing to do anything for me. So I said, well, you know, maybe we can do this multi-million-dollar study. And I was pitching Dr. Ornish on the study. I'm doing genomics in diabetes and doing, you know, all the top scans and everything. And you know what he said? And I said, "No, don't do that." He says, "You know what we need to do? We need to do a study that's never been done before that looks at a plant-based diet with 3 different levels of fat in the diet. A low-fat diet, which was like he championed, like 7% or under 10% fat. That was part of the Lifestyle Heart trial from 25 years ago, reversing heart disease. Okay, and then a moderate fat diet, which maybe is 20, 25, and then one that's higher fat, that's above 30, 40% fat. And see how that works out. That study's never been done. So it's just conjecture as to which is better. Okay, now personally, when we're dealing with Alzheimer's, do not eat a low-fat diet. Okay, I think there's good evidence to that. You do not want to be on a low-fat diet with Alzheimer's. Number one, you got to make sure you're getting enough EPA, DHA. That's really critical for the brain. Okay, but there's debate on this. Okay, but I think the majority of experts in the field would say that you want to be on at least a moderate fat diet. Okay, especially for the brain. You know, the brain is primarily fat. So you don't want to do anything that compromises the brain. You want to make sure you have enough of the healthy fats that nourish the brain and the nervous system. So I would defer in part to Brenda Davis, who's one of the world's leading dietitians, has written dozens of books on, and she's all 100% plant-based, and she would argue this, and I would not want to disagree with her because she's I've never known her to be wrong. Okay, and she will challenge any She's a dietitian, but she'll debate any doctor and usually win because she knows her science. And she says that you can be healthy on a plant-based diet that's low fat. You can be healthy on a plant-based diet that's moderate fat. You can be healthy on a plant-based diet that's up to 60% fat by calories. It's still by volume, mainly vegetables. Volume, right? Non-starchy vegetables, which is the key, has hardly any calories, just a lot of nutrients. So you're eating a lot of veggies, but the caloric value in those cases are actually quite high fat, up to 70% fat. And so it's all about quality. I'm more concerned about what kind of fat you're eating than how much you're getting. And so that's why I'm a big fan of promoting avocados, nuts, seeds, olives, and so forth, and getting plenty of those in the diet, okay? But then doing it in moderation in the sense that what does the body need? And that's a debatable question there. But we definitely know the body doesn't need refined carbohydrates. There's absolutely no need for refined carbohydrates. There's absolutely no need for sugars and candies and cakes and pastries, etc. And there's also no need for excess healthy starchy carbohydrates. I say excess. I'm a big fan of legumes and also of whole grains, etc. in moderation until it can be proven that that is adequate, that is acceptable and workable based on metabolic issues. So if something causes your blood sugars to shoot up, that should make us think twice of whether that's healthy for us or not. Not that blood sugars are the be-all, end-all of health, okay, but it is one indicator. So it's a very, you can debate this all night long on how much fat in the diet. I think the key, though, is make sure you're going with quality carbs, quality fats, quality protein. That's where the biggest argument is.
I have my wife has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I purchased a hyperbaric oxygen therapy chamber for her.
A soft chamber?
No, hard chamber.
Oh, nice. So how many atmospheres does it go up to? 2. Okay, good. Perfect.
And I did a protocol of 2 with oxygen on, oxygen off, according to Shia Fradi, physician in Israel. And my wife showed tremendous improvement. Yeah. Tremendous. But I don't know what protocol to go after that. I did 60 days at 2.0 on off. And then since then, I've been...
So 60 days straight?
No, 5 days on, 2 off, 5
okay.
on, 2 off for 60 sessions.
So 60 dives, yeah.
I don't want to overdo, and so I'm looking for a protocol, a continuing protocol. Where, do you know?
All right, so wow, so that's great. What an investment. That's great. And so you noticed a big impact on her health. Why? Because you're optimizing oxygen to the brain. Okay, you're removing inflammation that's in the brain that's chronically there, possibly due to traumatic brain injury or whatever other reason, or past history of poor blood flow to the brain, ischemic injury or whatever, vascular injury. And so all that extra oxygenation is dramatically improving healing and is as an anti-inflammatory marker or measure. So the key is, by the way, the principle here is get more blood and oxygen to the brain, okay, which can be improved by many, many different functions: exercise, nutrition, supplements, ginkgo biloba. So that's why when we're doing hyperbaric, what we want to do is make sure that we're incorporating as many of these other strategies simultaneously or on top of the hyperbaric, because now you're exponentially increasing benefit. Okay, so hyperbaric, though, is one of those monotherapies that actually shows benefit in many patients. Okay, but it would show even more benefit and more long-lasting benefit if it was followed or done simultaneously with many other beneficial strategies like we're discussing. Okay, so when it comes to oxygen therapy, one of the things that I encourage patients to do is to basically get one of the little compressors that basically gives you anywhere from up to 5 to 10 liters of oxygen a minute through a little cannula, and you can just buy those online. Sometimes you need a prescription to get those, or you can go on Craigslist and get brand new ones that, for $500. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I bought a whole bunch of those, and I never had to use them. I thought I would have to, but I never had to use them because we had all these other therapies to optimize the immune system. But the key is that I oftentimes encourage my patients to use one of them for a couple hours every evening while they're watching the news or reading. And so they're getting pure oxygen, okay, as they're breathing it in. And so they're dramatically increasing blood oxygenation, which is good for the brain. Other oxygen therapies are just deep breathing exercises. Just simply doing deep breathing exercises like for a minute every hour or two, dramatic improvements in oxygenation. Some doctors told their patients, stay out of the ER during COVID. Last thing you wanted to do is go to the ER with a low blood oxygen level, because then you'd get admitted and then see ya. That was it, right? So the worst place, like Norman Cousins used to say, the worst, says a hospital's no place to be if you're seriously ill. Okay, it was kind of a joke, but it was really true during COVID, right? You wanted to get early treatment, and doctors are saying if you have to go to the ER, hyperventilate before they check your oxygen levels, so they don't automatically admit you, because you just need treatment. You don't need admission, because they weren't treating you properly anyways at the time. So why be there? Okay, so bottom line is increasing oxygenation every which way you can, and fixing sleep apnea, which is a major issue with oxygenation. But I would keep doing it. Maybe you could do a couple days a week, okay, or you could, I would talk to somebody that specializes in it in terms of follow-up on a 60-dive protocol, okay, but I would keep it up and then do other things with it.
Do you know someone that does, that I could contact for further protocol?
Yeah, one of my good friends that actually I trained with, Dr. Wes Howard, great first name, by the way. He's out east, but if you email me, if you just go to dryoungberg.com, find my contact, email me, and I can send you his contact information. He actually runs an HBOC clinic, but he also fully trained in this protocol. So he would help you maybe integrate it properly.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Youngberg.
Right.
We really appreciate all your time and the questions.
All right, so I'll stay for okay. I was going to stay to midnight, but maybe I'll stay to 10. Okay, I'll give you 10 minutes if you want to ask me a few questions individually. Otherwise, it's been great working with you. God bless you. I'm so glad. By the way, a big hand to Dr. Sarah and Dinner with the Doctor.
I don't have it on me. I think it's